Hello there. Maybe that's an inappropriate greeting since we're talking about Harry Potter again, and I'm back with the second Harry Potter story, The Chamber of Secrets. As like last time, we're going to be talking about both versions in the exact same way, in which I assess the differences, critique what happens, and so on and so forth. Maybe point out observations I have while reading the story. If you've seen the last video, you know the formula already, and I have no intention of changing it. Now, on with Harry Potter. Both the first book and movie did well, and so for both, there was a journey of several years. Both to come up with the source material, and then to adapt the source material. Both are hard tasks, even if the latter is easier. You still need to abridge what happens, condense plot points, but still make a compelling story. Honestly, when going through both versions of the Chamber of Secrets, it really felt like there were sizable chunks of content cut out, more so than the Philosopher's Stone when it comes to film adaptation. This caught me a bit off guard since audiobook-wise, the second book is just over an hour longer than the first book, maybe adding an extra 20 minutes on top of that. I was expecting, of course, a bunch of stuff to be cut, because that's just how it goes for adaptations of detailed source material. But it's really surprising how much was actually cut from the film, and by that, I mean stuff that would never cross your mind ever, because you need the book to introduce it. That's not a knockback against the film, because the film I quite enjoy just like the first one. Chris Columbus returned to direct the sequel, and as I stated, I much enjoyed his directing style, and how he presented the story. Obviously, there are a lot of other people who brought the series to the big screen in an effective way, but I like generalizing in this case. Pretty much all cast members returned to play their respective characters, plus of course, some new ones. As I indicated in the last video, this was one of the last roles of the late Richard Harris, as he passed away after this movie was done filming. So this is the second, and last time we see him as Albus Dumbledore. And you know, I know that Michael Gambon is no longer with us too, but I became a bit nervous based on what I heard about the two actors who played Dumbledore. Just to remind you, I wasn't able to make it past the Prisoner of Azkaban film, and past that point, I probably watched the movies out of order, but didn't finish any of them. Well, this is probably the last time I can say that, because now I've made it my mission to do the entire series, with books 1 to 7 as well as the respective adaptations. The Prisoner of Azkaban is obviously next, but for now, let's concern ourselves with the Chamber of Secrets. To be honest, this is probably the most exciting title out of any of the titles so far. I suppose the Deathly Hallows is very finale sounding, but the Chamber of Secrets was something, even in the film context alone, that I completely wanted to see. I remember good things from the film, and expected good things from the book too. As I said, Stephen Fry was excellent as the audiobook narrator, doing expressive impressions of all the characters. And even the disadvantage of having no sound or ambience would change that. The first book still gave me a lot to chew on, and sticking to my approach of watching the movie first, then reading the book was still incredibly fresh. And I don't think my approach was a mistake. The book is still going to include subplots absent in the movie. Plus the story is told in 2 different ways. Plus any changes will throw me in for a loop. So I'm sticking to my approach. Movie first to remain unbiased, book second to get the full context of everything. I've also been eager to tell you how the Quidditch game between Ravenclaw and Slytherin went. If you think Slytherin's dirty tactics made it any kind of trouble for Ravenclaw, you'd be sorely mistaken. It was actually one gigantic joke of a match, honestly. It was so fucking boring. And the reason why was Dave Filoni. Yeah, Filoni made it onto the Slytherin Quidditch team through nothing but family bribes, I'd assume. Turns out he comes from a wealthy, pure-blood wizard family. family. Yeah, he comes from a lineage of incredibly influential wizards from Southern Europe. Remember how I said his surname sounded like a pizza topping? Well, yeah, he's got Italian ancestry. There's a shitload of wizards in Italy, and the broader Filoni family runs the wizarding world side of the country like the mafia, like you wouldn't believe. Point is, he bought his way onto the Quidditch team, and it shows how there's a real difference between talent and wealth. Because as you probably guessed, Filoni was perhaps the most shit Quidditch player I've ever seen. As soon as the game started, I saw Filoni keep going the opposite direction to where he was supposed to go because he was that clueless. He told the captain to shut up when he was being given instructions on what to do, and in fact, Filoni literally knocks the captain, the Slytherin captain, his own teammate off the broom when he was told to focus on the snitch. Then when he was called down by the referee, he kept arguing with the referee, and not even the threat of having 50 points docked off Slytherin was enough to get him to stop. The match just ended up getting delayed by half an hour because that's how long Filoni and the referee were arguing. I swear, the moment one of the bludgers on the Slytherin team threw the big ball on Filoni's head, knocking him and his stupid cowboy hat out, everyone cheered and the game finally resumed. But by then, it was far too late. The Ravenclaw Seeker caught the snitch a few minutes later, and we won. I recall the Slytherin crowd weren't even bummed out. They were just deadpan, because I guess they were shocked at the worst Seeker in Quidditch history. Now I'd like to say this is the part where Filoni was kicked off the Quidditch team and he got expelled. But actually no, he's still on the fucking team. And for what I've heard, he's the reason Slytherin is last place in the House Cup. Like seriously, Ravenclaw is in third place, and we're miles ahead of Slytherin. Slytherin isn't even in the conversation anymore. And seriously, I've seen some Slytherins go out of their way to defend Filoni, because apparently he knows a lot about wizarding. He's even claimed to be Dumbledore's apprentice. And the more dumbass Slytherins, I'm talking Crabbe and Goyle stupid, listen to him. It's like they're unaware that he's the reason they're last place. He's broken like a ton of school rules, and he's still at Hogwarts. Sometimes I'm just tempted to show him what's really in my mystery potion I'm holding right now to teach him a lesson. But I know it will end badly for me. Ravenclaw does have a lot of catching up to do to win the House Cup at the end of the day. Well, at least Slytherin's not going to go anywhere with such a model citizen. But point is, I've wasted enough of your time talking about Filoni. Let's get into Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Same formula. We're going through the story, chapter by chapter, scene by scene, covering all parallel events between both versions, as well as the stuff the film omitted. And believe me, there's quite a bit more. With that being said, I might as well jump in now. So as per the story, the first chapter is called The Worst Birthday, and is pretty similar in both versions of the story. In the film, Harry is looking at his photo book, minding his own business, although his owl Hedwig is incredibly agitated in both versions, making a lot of rattling noise. Following that, we get Harry's Uncle Vernon bursting in and demanding aggressively that the owl be kept quiet. Well, actually in the movie, he's specifically called downstairs. Harry, clearly trying to convince his uncle for the millionth time in a row that Hedwig is bored, and it would do her some good to be let out of the cage for a couple of minutes, but being the strict abusive arsehole he is, Vernon denies Harry and Hedwig any leniency. And after the book explains that Harry's been back with the Dursleys for the summer holidays at 4 Privet Drive, he at least has more optimism before he found out he was a wizard. Or at least I would say that, provided he was actually receiving messages from his friends. Around here, I'm also impressed that the setup for the story with the Dursleys is pretty much the same too, with it only being slightly abridged. And I mean slightly. Vernon Dursley this time has a dinner he considers important. As you might have noticed, this chapter being named The Worst Birthday obviously indicates that this all takes place on Harry's 12th birthday, and as such, it's uneventful as ever. The movie doesn't actually hint that it's his birthday when it opens. Not that it matters much in the film's context as far as we've seen, since Harry gets absolutely no acknowledgement on his birthday, and no presents or anything. There's this brief moment in the book where Vernon speaks up, announcing that it's an important day. And Harry, half forgetting that he's a nobody to the Dursleys, starts getting his hopes up, until he realised that he was actually announcing the dinner party, meant to give him a leg up in his career. The book explains that some rich builder and his wife were coming over, and Vernon was hoping to get an order from them, because that would be some sweet dough. He had been talking about this for a fortnight right until then. The movie basically gives us an abridged version of all this, but you can easily piece together that Vernon considers this all important to his job. In both versions, he goes over the plan with everyone. Petunia will greet them both inside, and with Dudley, he'll be opening the door for them, and trying his hardest to be a gentleman, offering to take the couple's coats when they walk in. As for Harry, he says that he's going to stay in his room and pretend he doesn't exist. The dialogue is slightly different in the book when he says this, but it's a minuscule adjustment. In the book he says, "I'll be in my bedroom, making no noise and pretending I'm not there." Point is, his role is to stay out of everything. In the book, the Dursleys continue discussing their grand plan. Now, this doesn't really have any overarching importance, obviously. It's just set up for the story. But Stephen Fry's performance in the audiobook gives the indication that the Dursleys are trying extra hard to impress the couple. Dudley proudly says that he plans to tell the builder, Mr. Mason, quote, "We had to write an essay about our hero at school, Mr. Mason, and I wrote about you." Oh my god, that is so cringeworthy. And Harry agrees with me, because unlike Aunt Petunia who cries in delight, Harry thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever heard and has to suppress his laughter by hiding under the table. Although when Uncle Vernon calls to him, he tries his hardest to give a straight face and have him repeat the same line about staying in his bedroom and pretending he doesn't exist. We learn briefly that the Masons don't know anything about Harry, and it's gonna stay that way before the pre-planned meeting is over. Now, I should mention that in the book, this is earlier in the day, while in the movie, this is right before the Masons arrive. Something exclusive to the film is a little catch-up line to account for a lack of time in the last movie. I mentioned how in the Philosopher's Stone book, Vernon gave Dudley's second room to Harry, so he no longer had to sleep in the cupboard under the stairs. Well, yeah, in the film continuity, they didn't have time to show that. So they're explaining here why Harry's got Dudley's second room, although they show how arrogant Vernon is, where he demands Harry be a lot more grateful, since they raised him since he was a baby, and quote, gave him that room out of their own kindness. Of course, you gotta love the audacity of Uncle Vernon, who is quite aware that he's been nothing but a terrible guardian for Harry, and in fact, did the absolute bare minimum for him. So yeah, that's the scene. In the book, since this is earlier in the day, Harry walks outside, through the back door. He basically chants happy birthday under his breath and feels so miserable. In both versions, they explain that Harry has strangely not received any sort of letters from his friends. In the movie, Harry references this when he begs Vernon to give his owl some fresh air, and Dudley intentionally bumps into Harry when asking him who the hell would want to be friends with him. Well, in the book, it's referenced here when the all-knowing narrator discusses Harry's thoughts. It's noted how it's all quite odd since Ron in particular offered to have Harry stay over at his place. It's also referenced here that Harry, as an underage wizard, isn't allowed to use magic away from school, and it's the thing that prevents him from unlocking Hedwig's cage with magic, as one might expect. Harry hasn't told the Dursleys about this restriction, because he knows it's his only line of defense from being pushed around too much. In the early weeks back from Hogwarts, he enjoyed muttering nonsense words, and seeing Dudley bolt from whatever room he was in. Although the thing is, it's gotten boring, as now he feels forgotten, down to the point that if Draco Malfoy was the first one to contact him, he'd be glad to see that he was still remembered by the Wizarding world. After recapping the climax of the last book, in which he escaped Voldemort for the second time in a row, during his thinking, he noticed after staring at a hedge that the hedge was staring back. He notices a pair of large green eyes, although they disappear when Dudley shows up to bother Harry. Dudley actually remembers that it's Harry's birthday, but of course he isn't greeting him, he's annoying him. So to get him to piss off, Harry lies that he was staring at the bush to figure out how to set it on fire, and then starts speaking out some nonsense magic words, and a panicked Dudley calls for his mum. And after dodging a literal frying pan, Harry is punished by being forced to do every house chore, like cleaning the windows, washing the car, mowing the lawn, etc. It's not that important, but the point is that he's forced to do this over the summer heat. And as soon as he's called back inside, he's told to eat his dinner quickly, which of course is just some bread and some cheese, and then he's sent straight to his bedroom. He's given one last warning by Vernon, and then he's in his room. Although, as anyone who's at least watched the movie will know, there's a certain someone there. And that's the end of chapter 1. So chapter 1 has a great amount of setup. It shows how shit life is at the Dursleys, and how Harry, and thereby the audience, yearns for the second year to arrive. Despite that, there is a sense of humour with the corny pre-planning from the Dursleys and how they're trying so hard to please the Masons. You probably noticed that the second half of the chapter was cut from the film, although the movie gives us all necessary information without feeling rushed. It's the stupid dinner party with Vernon looking to get a boost in his career. Harry hasn't got any letters, he's going to stay up in his bedroom and make no noise, etc. All the necessary information is conveyed. Of course, we don't get Harry's inner thoughts, but that's true of most films. So let's move on to chapter 2, titled Dobby's Warning. Small criticism, but I don't like how the chapter name gives away a part of the plot. So I think J.K. Rowling could have used alternative titles that have a more vague description of the chapter. Like for Dobby's Warning, in particular, I might have called it The Unexpected Guest, or something like that. I remember in the Philosopher's Stone novel, the last chapter was called The Man with Two Faces, and that largely gave away a major reveal, as one could start guessing what that title meant, and it soiled the build-up, and it actually made the movie the more preferable version, as it doesn't give that away before the reveal in play. In that case, I think a better name would be The Battle for the Stone, as it's a chapter name that doesn't give away the shocking revelation about Quirrell having Voldemort on the back of his head the whole time. So yeah, more vague titles is a criticism I have for the whole book series so far, but anyways, I think we should move on to the actual chapter as it's written. So yeah, upon returning to his room in both versions, Harry meets a magical creature, an elf, who shortly into the conversation identifies himself as Dobby the house elf. Dobby, being a completely CGI character, is pretty much as described in the book. Big eyes, long ears, sharp nose, and wearing what looks like a washed out pillowcase for clothes with holes cut out so it could be worn properly. The movie of course abridges this conversation with all the necessary information. However, it gives off the same vibe. Dobby in his high-pitched voice makes noise that Harry tries everything to suppress. In both versions, Harry tries to get Dobby to quiet down, but after saying specific things to him, Dobby freaks out and starts banging his head across a solid surface in his room. The scene has a tragic sense of humor in both versions. And what I mean by that is that in this character's introduction, Dobby gives the most saddening slavery sob story imaginable, but it's told in a comedic way. And you feel like it would be wrong to laugh in-universe, but you can't help it while reading or watching the story. Dobby is an incredibly simple-minded creature, and has a very tragically funny way of talking. In the movie specifically, when Harry first speaks to Dobby, he says, quote, not to be rude or anything, but this isn't a great time to have a house elf in my bedroom. And he says it in such a passive way. Like it isn't bizarre to see any kind of elf in a house, even in the context of a story with a whole wizarding world. This is such a subtle but effective joke. So when Harry asks Dobby what he's here for, Dobby is very reluctant to speak what he wants right away. And so Harry tells him to sit down, which is a massive mistake because Dobby starts crying hysterically, saying that no wizard has asked him to sit down like an equal before. His crying is very silly, and when Harry responds that he can't have met many decent wizards, things get worse when it comes to noise, as Dobby remarks that he hasn't, although he proceeds to bang his head against the window, or at least he does so in the book. In the movie, he bangs his head on some storage furniture. Either way, he shouts loudly to himself, going, "Bad Dobby, bad Dobby," as he bangs his head aggressively. In the book specifically, this actually wakes Hedwig up. In both versions, Dobby explains that the wizarding family he serves doesn't know he's here, and that they would punish him severely if they ever knew. There's an additional line in the book Dobby gives that he usually slams his head in between the oven, and his wizard family commonly tell him to give out extra punishments to himself, and so Dobby does so. Dobby also remarks that he cannot leave or escape until he is willingly set free. And since the wizarding family will never set him free, Dobby will remain a house elf until he dies. In the book, Dobby is also humbled by Harry Potter, and Harry mentions his friends, although he's reminded that they haven't written to him. And on that, keep that in mind for later. Harry also makes the mistake of saying Voldemort's name out loud, and makes Dobby freak out again. But on to the main point, Dobby, as per the chapter's title, gives a warning to Harry, and it's the last thing Harry wants to hear. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts. As Dobby says, there is a terrible plot in the works, and Harry must remain where he is to keep himself safe, although he's not allowed to say who is plotting it. It's not Voldemort when Harry asks, but he doesn't get to find out. But of course not without asking. Harry in the book points out that Dumbledore is a guardian over the school, so there's no way anybody could do harm. Dobby eventually bangs his head across a solid surface again, and this time it attracts Uncle Vernon to come upstairs. In both versions, as Harry hears Uncle Vernon coming, he quickly shoves Dobby into the closet to hide him. Vernon absolutely rips on him, and he actually references how Harry, quote, ruined the punchline for his Japanese golfer joke in both versions, which is nice attention to detail. And quick question, the Japanese golfer joke wasn't a racist joke Vernon was telling, was it? Knowing the Dursleys, I wouldn't put it past them if they were racist too. A very, very small difference is that Vernon has a different excuse for the noise coming from Harry's room. In the book, it's Dudley's television being too loud.
Oh, don't mind that, it's just...
In the film, it's the house cat. Either way, Vernon warns him that he'll wish he'll never be born if he makes another sound. In both versions, upon Vernon leaving, Harry opens the door and tells Dobby this is why he can't stay with the Dursleys. He belongs at Hogwarts, where he's got friends. But Dobby reminds him that his friends haven't even been writing to him. Harry knows, but then he realizes that he hadn't told Dobby anything about his friends, and asks him how he knows his friends haven't been writing to him. And in the movie especially, I love the guilty face Dobby makes. And that's where Harry realizes that Dobby's been intercepting and stopping the letters from reaching him. Dobby confirms this as he pulls out a good chunk of letters from the pillowcase he's wearing. And that's where Harry tries to force the letters off Dobby, but he jumps out of the way and remarks that Harry must promise that he won't go back to Hogwarts if he wants to see the letters. Harry defiantly refuses, and so Dobby goes for the ultimate attempt to stop Harry from going to Hogwarts. He opens the door to his room and sprints down the stairs, and yeah, that's enough to make anyone get goosebumps. most of all Harry. Harry chases him downstairs, trying to avoid making noise, and finds Dobby next to the cake Aunt Petunia made for the party. In the book it's actually a pudding, but the same thing applies. So in both versions, Harry openly pleads and begs Dobby not to do anything to the dessert, and Dobby tries to have him swear that he won't return to Hogwarts. But again, Harry refuses. Now what happens next is a bit different. In the book, Dobby drops the pudding in the kitchen and it splatters everywhere in the room. In the film, Dobby levitates the cake over to Mrs. Mason's head, and despite Harry's attempt to catch it, it falls on Mrs. Mason's head, covering her in cake. In the book, after the pudding splatters everywhere, it attracts Uncle Vernon, who is furious with Harry. However, it doesn't ruin everything for the Dursleys just yet, as he tries brushing this off as Harry being his nephew who is upset by strangers, which is why they kept him upstairs. This explanation actually makes it into the film right after the cake falls on Mrs. Mason's head. So in the book, he's able to redirect everyone back into the living room, while Harry is forced to clean the kitchen. But what absolutely ruins everything is an owl that flies into the house, dropping a letter, and this is the point of no return. As the owl flies in, Mrs. Mason becomes terrified, and Mr. Mason assumes it's a tasteless practical joke since his wife hates birds, and he and his wife leave the Dursley house, Vernon failing to secure the order he wanted. We don't actually learn what happened in the film in regards to the order Vernon wanted, but we can assume it was rejected in the film canon too. Anyways, exclusive to the book is the owl that swooped in dropping a letter, which is right after the Masons leave. Vernon storms up to Harry and forces him to read the letter. The letter is from a wizard working under the Ministry of Magic, stating that the magic performed in the house breaks the rule that underage wizards aren't allowed to do magic, and any further attempts will result in him being expelled from his wizarding school. Yeah. So now the Dursleys know that he's not allowed to use magic outside school, and Vernon is furious. So basically, in both versions, Vernon locks Harry in his room, remarking that he'll never go back to Hogwarts again. He even goes as far to bar the window to his room shut, so he can't get out through the window. The book also elaborates how he was locked in his room all day every day, except to go to the toilet every morning and evening, and was shoved in food under the door 3 times a day. And then 3 days later, the Dursleys were refusing to relent, and Harry, after being given some cold soup, was aching to see Hogwarts again. The book also adds in a dream where he was a circus attraction locked in a cage where Dudley rattles his cage, although this causes him to wake up to reality. And in both versions, Ron, along with his brothers Fred and George, have shown up in a flying car. And this is where chapter 2 ends on a cliffhanger. And now there is hope yet. So I like the second chapter. The revelation of another threat at Hogwarts, as well as the tension being quiet, is superb, and perfectly moves the story forward. So chapter 3 is called The Burrow, and it consists of everything right after. Ron greets Harry, annoyed that he hasn't been responding to his letters, and Harry catches them up to speed on how he's been locked up, and so they prepare for Harry to escape. In the film, Harry quickly grabs his stuff, as the Weasleys force the bars open with the car, which makes all the noise that attracts the Dursleys. Harry passes along his stuff, and just when he's about to get in the car, Vernon grabs him, although his grip slips when the car drives out into the sky, and Vernon falls into a bush out front. In the book, since his stuff is locked down in the cupboard under the stairs, Fred and George, after bolting open the bars, which doesn't make enough noise in this version, lockpick his room door to collect his stuff. The thing that makes the noise is Hedwig, and Harry, right after passing her in the cage to Ron, gets into the car, and just like in the movie, is gripped by Vernon, but loses his grip, and they manage to get away. The momentum in both is pretty good, although the book adds some suspense of not making noise, whereas in the movie, the noise is made straight away. Either way, Harry outright escapes, and the Weasleys intend to take him back to their place, where their parents, Percy and Ginny, are. Exclusive to the book is an exchange between everyone in the car, where Harry pretty much explains everything. First, Harry advises the Weasleys to let Hedwig out of her cage, since she's been locked in the cage all summer and desperately needs the exercise. Then Harry explains everything that resulted in him being locked up. That includes Dobby. Fred and George collectively suggest that someone sent Dobby to stop Harry from returning to Hogwarts. And they subsequently ask if there's anyone with a grudge against Harry. And yeah, there's an obvious answer to that question: Draco Malfoy. And this is where the pair give Harry, and by extension the audience, a ton of insight into Draco's dad Lucius. While Draco mentioned his father at least once in the last book, it's here where we learn that Lucius was a huge supporter of Voldemort, and is suspected to have been in his inner circle, and of course, backtracked on all that after the Dark Lord's demise. Harry now heavily suspects Draco sent the house elf, and is now skeptical on whether or not Dobby's warning was genuine. So as they're driving towards the Weasleys' place, Harry also learns that the Weasleys' father, Arthur, works in the Ministry of Magic's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Division, a branch of the government that deals with items that have been cursed that Muggles accidentally use. Citing a story about when a witch died, one of her magical items found their way into the hands of a Muggle, and hijinks ensued, resulting in the Ministry of Magic having to get rid of the item, and mind-wiping every Muggle who came into contact with the item, since the magical world prefers to keep itself a secret. The Weasleys are very passive around the Muggles, however. Harry is told that Arthur Weasley has all sorts of Muggle stuff stored away in the house, although a lot of it is like alien technology to them. But it's the fact that the Muggles have technology in the first place is what makes them so fascinating to Arthur. With that information, I can imagine that Fred and George could whip out a PC out of their dad's junk pile, figure out how it works, and start playing games like Wolfenstein 3D, since that's what the Muggles find popular. Keep in mind that Wolf 3D was one of the most popular games in '92, which is when the Chamber of Secrets takes place. Anyways, we cut back to the film stuff, when the four of them land at the Weasley Burrow. It's not quite as described in the book, as the Weasley house has around 4 chimneys, and a shitload of rooms added to account for additional family members, presumably as Fred and George and Ron and Ginny were born. Despite it being a shitty house in the context of the Wizarding World, it's already an improvement to 4 Privet Drive to Harry in the book. In the movie, we see a bunch of chores being done with magic, such as a frying pan cleaning itself. In the book, the Weasley boys plan to pretend that Harry found his own way to the Weasley place, so they don't get in trouble for using their dad's magical car. However, in both versions, they are caught immediately. I mentioned in the last video that this is Molly Weasley, and she is furious. The book even describes that despite how kind she looks, she in the moment resembled a raging saber-tooth. She questions her 3 sons on what they were doing, remarking in both versions how they could have been seen, or crashed, or whatever else that could go wrong. And of course, she's more kind to Harry, welcoming him to their house, and invites him in for some breakfast. Adapted from the book is the moment where Ginny comes down in sleepwear, sees Harry, and runs back upstairs, with Fred, George, and Ron explaining that Ginny was talking about him all summer, to the point of it getting annoying. And yeah, in case it wasn't obvious in that first reintroduction to Ginny, she likes Harry to the point of obsession. Now in the Philosopher's Stone book, Ginny's extreme interest in Harry wasn't hinting towards a crush directly, but it sure the hell is obvious here. In fact, Ginny seems to be like the character whose only personality trait being that she likes Harry, and her crush goes to some absurd levels later on. I'll get to it when we get there, but believe me, it goes to the point of being extremely cringeworthy, although not at the story's detriment. I should also mention that Ginny is played by Bonnie Wright, another child actress of the time. Something exclusive to the book are the gnomes. I've been told that this was included in the Chamber of Secrets video game, but basically, Ron is punished by having to get rid of some live gnomes who invaded the garden. This part doesn't really matter that much, and I'm not surprised it was cut from the movie. Something that the movie does include, though, is of course Arthur Weasley, the father of the family. This is where the movie mentions what Arthur's job is, but I am pleasantly surprised how true to the book this introduction is. While Arthur is not quite as described in the book, being described as a balding thin man with glasses, his personality remains the same. In both versions, upon venting some frustration over some enchantments at work, his wife Molly tells him about how Fred, George and Ron used the enchanted car, and not realizing that he's supposed to be scolding them, he encouragingly asks them how it went, clearly excited to hear about it, although he forces himself to change his tune and act all disappointed. But of course it's too late. Everyone knows he's not angry. It reminds me of that scene in The Incredibles where Helen informs Bob about their son Dash using his superpowers to fuck around in class. And Bob isn't angry at all. Rather, he's excited and asks him how fast he was going. In the book, there's also the detail of Molly grandstanding Arthur because he told her that all he intended to do was take it apart, but instead he enchanted the car. Turns out Arthur wrote a loophole in wizarding law that allowed him to fuck around with muggle stuff. There's also how Arthur is introduced to Harry. In the book, this comes around in the conversation about the enchanted car, where Molly mentions that Harry came by the flying car to the Burrow, while in the movie, Arthur directly asks Harry who he is, and is startled when he learns that he's the very famous Harry Potter. Now, since this is all abridged, of course, the filmmakers crack a joke when Arthur Weasley, knowing about Harry's muggle lifestyle with the Dursleys, asks him a question about the function of a rubber ducky. Yeah, the jokes are sort of immature to an extent, but this isn't the worst case at least. That comes later in the movie. In the book, I also believe there's Arthur asking Harry a similar question, except it's about how telephones work. So exclusive to the book, it describes how Harry stayed with the Weasleys for a bit, and a hidden detail where Ginny hides in her room, and Ron makes a remark about how Ginny is never normally this shy. We get a brief glimpse of Ron's room too, which basically fits his personality. A moving poster of his favourite Quidditch team, alongside a messy stacked pile of books and so on. Despite it being a shitty wizarding house, Harry sees it as an instant improvement over the Dursleys' house, and that's the end of chapter 3. So yeah, this is our proper introduction to the Weasleys as a family. And this is what I mean when the Weasleys care more for Harry more than the Dursleys do. Harry might be a famous wizard, but Ron has a genuine friendship with Harry. I just found the chapter in both versions to be humble. The way the Weasley house is designed is very imaginative to how it was described in the book, and I can buy the book version of the Burrow looking at least 80% like this. So yeah, good chapter. However, I don't have that much to say adaptation-wise. It's the standard affair. As such, let's get on to chapter 4. Titled At Flourish and Blots. Now, where the movie cuts straight to the trip to Diagon Alley, the book has Harry stay at the Weasleys' place for a short while. The book describes how different the Burrow is from Privet Drive, and how, unlike Privet Drive, everyone at the Burrow actually likes him. Mrs. Weasley bugs him about having tidy socks, and as mentioned before, Mr. Weasley bombards Harry with questions about the Muggles. On top of telephones, there's stuff about plugs, and the postal service, and normal Muggle stuff like that. Arthur seems incredibly awestruck by how the Muggles get around without magic. Now, an observation I had while reading the series is while the Wizarding World is an escape from the regular world, the regular world isn't exactly a disadvantage when compared to the Wizarding World. While I imagine a lot of kids who read these books would aspire to be a wizard or witch themselves, it doesn't seem like the Muggle world is that far off compared to the wizards. The Muggles have a lot of the essential the Wizarding World has, and sometimes with the same efficiency. The Muggles don't need owls to send mail, for example, and in the timeline, this is a few years before the internet became accessible to the average person. The Muggles are well on their way to having their own alternatives to what the Wizarding World had, and it was progressing by the year. I recall when discussing the contrast between the Muggle and Wizarding World, the Queen Diclonius suggested that even if the two societies went to war, for example, even by the 1990s, the Muggles did have a fair chance of winning, and I agree with that. not only would the Muggles have the advantage of numbers, but also technology came a long way since medieval times. It would be kind of interesting to actually see how a full-blown Muggle Wizarding War would play out, because I think the Muggles stand more of a chance than you might think. I also have this image of my head of the American Muggles taking out the Wizarding world with drone strikes.
America, fuck yeah, coming again, save the motherfucking day, yeah, America, fuck yeah, freedom is the only way, yeah. Terrorists, your game is through, 'cause now you have to answer to America, fuck yeah.
And magic can only go so far in protection, at least to the extent the Harry Potter series shows. Anyways, back to the book. After staying with the Weasleys for a while, letters are sent to everyone including Harry. This is also featured in the movie. However, it takes place where Chapter 3 would take place. So there's a bit of rearranging and abridging scenes. Point is, Harry gets a second-year letter, basically telling him to go to King's Cross Station on September the 1st, as well as collecting a bunch of books for the year. A name that pops up a lot are books by one Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart was actually first referenced in the last chapter, but I omitted it, because I wanted to save him for his proper introduction in the movie. Point is, for now, Harry and presumably Ron too have to get a bunch of books from Lockhart. Ginny is also starting her first year at Hogwarts. And we also get Percy, who plays a minor role in the films, but in the book, well, he actually plays a bigger but still minor role. In both versions, he's a prefect at Hogwarts, and the only responsible Weasley child that's still attending Hogwarts. Exclusive to the book during this whole letter scene is a letter from Hermione to both Harry and Ron, who of course is all over doing homework even though it's the holidays. The book also describes Harry, along with Fred, George and Ron, practicing Quidditch outside, although they're forced to use apples for practice, since they can't actually use Quidditch balls. And they also can't fly too high, maybe so some nearby Muggles can't see them. Ron complains during all of this that Lockhart's books are expensive, plus they need to get Ginny her robes and wand and whatnot. Knowing where the story's going, let me tell you that things with Lockhart are about to get much worse. I think I should also mention that Percy is pretty much a reclusive character who minds his own business. Yeah, if you were wondering why he isn't very present in the movies, well, that's because he isn't that big of a presence in the books. Ron, Fred, and George, for example, have more of a presence in the story. So anyways, in the scene before they return to what the film shows us, the following Wednesday, Molly wakes everyone up, cooks them bacon sandwiches, and then we get that scene where they're about to go to Diagon Alley. As you might expect, the scene is pretty close in both versions. In the book specifically, after realizing that Harry hasn't used flu powder before, Molly gets someone else to demonstrate what Harry's supposed to do. In the book, it's Fred who goes first. In the movie, it's Ron, but the effect is the same. In the book, George also follows, then Arthur, before it's Harry's turn. Now, adapted straight from the book is Molly telling Harry to speak incredibly clearly. And you've got that moment where Harry does the exact opposite, pronouncing Diagon Alley too quickly. Nervousness played a factor in both, but there's the fact in the book that he was a little smoked up by the flu powder and failed to pronounce it clearly. Now, the movie skips straight to Harry's arrival elsewhere, but the book actually describes what Harry's teleportation trip was like, and it was a little something like this. Okay, now that you're caught up with what happened off-screen, unsurprisingly Harry comes out of the wrong chute. And I mean it when I say the wrong chute, as it's pretty much the most creepy place one could enter and find themselves alone in. Now, the movie keeps it brief, and I gotta praise the set design yet again. It's like one big corpse museum full of body parts. We see some shrunken heads, and Harry makes the small mistake of touching a rotting hand that manages to grip him briefly, and it's a struggle getting the hand off. Maybe this is the wizarding equivalent of a Chinese finger trap. You know those things? Then as soon as he goes outside, there's a bunch of creepy wizards and witches who scream stranger danger and give him disturbing or odd stares. There's like this one witch who tries harassing him, and Harry is scared all over again, but then a friendly face shows up to save the day. Hagrid. Yeah, you gotta love that giant. He's awesome, even if he is clumsy. Turns out Harry entered the similarly named Nocturne Alley, which is a street away from Diagon Alley. That's where all the child predator wizards hang out pretty much. Okay, I made that up, but you get the point. Harry, of course, proceeds to ask Hagrid what the hell he was doing there. And Hagrid improvises a story about buying some slug repellent, since they're ruining the school lunches or something. Now, as you might expect, the book's version of Harry's arrival in Nocturne Alley is a tad different. While introduced in the movie a scene later, this is where Lucius Malfoy makes his book appearance. So as stated earlier, Harry showed up at just the wrong place, and his glasses are broken on top of that in both versions. The hand on the cushion is pretty much the main thing adapted into the movie, but Harry also sees a bloody deck of cards and a staring glass eyeball. However, the general vibe of creepy masks and bones and whatnot is present, and before he can bolt for the door, he sees Draco along with his father Lucius through the other side of the glass door. So he hides immediately, not wanting to confront either of them. Now, the book doesn't immediately identify the man as Lucius, but that's for the following eavesdrop conversation to reveal. Now, Lucius in the book is described as pretty much resembling his son, except of course, he's older. Basically, with both Malfoys unaware of Harry's presence, Lucius rings the bell on a counter. He tells his son not to touch anything, and Draco responds with a snarky remark that he thought his pa was gonna buy him a present, and his dad says that yeah, it was gonna be a racing broom, and then Draco talks shit about Harry, remarking that his popularity bought him a broomstick so he could play on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Wow. You know, I kind of forgot how unlikable Draco could be from last time. He hasn't changed a bit, and you'll see that he can reach new lows. Maybe not in this book, but in the future. Then some guy named Mr. Borgin appears from the counter, and the two start conversing. Lucius is here to sell some of his possessions, and they reference how much he wants to get rid of them before the Ministry of Magic searches his home. Lucius envies Arthur Weasley for his Muggle Protection Act, which you can piece together what that is. Pretty much as nasty as each other. Draco starts blurting out that the teachers at Hogwarts are so biased, letting a Muggle-born student like Hermione Granger be their favourite. And then Lucius snaps back at his son being like, yeah, it's a pity that a Muggle-born's got better grades than you, Draco. Yeah, the most you get out of this scene is that Lucius is a terrible role model for his son. He resents Muggles for no other reason than... oh, who the hell knows actually. Bigotry is stupid in general. It's not supposed to make sense. It's just ignorance of someone else's culture, pretty much. Well anyways, Draco almost discovers Harry hiding in the cabinet until Lucius calls him away, and they leave the shop. Mr. Borgin afterwards pretty much drops his polite demeanor and starts cursing under his breath about how much he dislikes Lucius, and then Harry finally gets his opportunity to leave the shop. Now, I discovered this while writing, but apparently this whole scene was actually filmed for the movie, but it was cut. So it's little more than a deleted scene. At least we sort of got a film counterpart for Borgin at least. But you know how this works. I'm going to compare what's in the final cut of a movie. And since this didn't make it into the final cut, I'm going to skip over it. To be honest, out of all the scenes to cut out, this one was sort of understandable, since we still get the vibe regardless that the Malfoys are this pretentious, stuck-up family who hate Muggles because they've got impure blood, whatever that's supposed to mean. So in the book, the scene after leaving the shop is pretty similar. A bunch of shabby wizards start talking to him, and just like in the movie, he's bailed out by Hagrid. And just like in the movie, Harry specifically asks what he was doing in Nocturne Alley, and Hagrid pretty much gives him a similar response. There's also a tiny bit in the book where Harry has to explain why he never wrote back to Hagrid, but back to what both versions show, is Harry stumbling into Hermione by chance, and right after greeting each other, she opts to fix Harry's glasses with magic, the exact phrase being Oculus Reparo. Now, since I assess every little detail, it's worth noting that in the book, it was actually Arthur Weasley who fixed Harry's glasses after the pair and Hagrid managed to find the Weasley family. A pointless and inconsequential change, let's move on. Exclusive to the book after that is Harry discussing the Malfoys, and you can pretty much tell that Arthur Weasley doesn't like Lucius much in turn. concern. He's excited that Harry witnessed Lucius trying to sell some of his crap with some dirt on it. Book exclusive on top of that is the introduction of Hermione's parents. Well, not really an introduction, but rather a brief scene where we see her muggle parents try to switch out British currency to wizarding currency. Then Harry follows the Weasleys into Gringotts back to collect all the money they need for new stuff. Compared to his own vault, Harry sees that the Weasleys are not at all wealthy. There's basically a couple handful of coins and that's pretty much it. Afterwards, Harry and his friends pretty much go all around Diagon Alley. It's around an hour before they've got to buy their books. Fred and George are in the practical joke shop along with Lee Jordan, and Percy is in another store reading a book about Hogwarts prefects and their later careers. With Ron making an offhand remark that Percy really wants to be Minister of Magic one day. Then finally we get that scene from the movie in which there's a large crowd gathered around a certain bookshop. A banner on the side showing that Gilderoy Lockhart will be signing copies of one of his books. A detail exclusive to the book, and an overarching character trait for this book pretty much, is how Hermione has the most annoying crush on Lockhart. Just like every single witch lined up in that very scene. All described as being around Molly Weasley's age. Yeah. So as soon as they squeeze through, we get Gilderoy Lockhart in the flesh. And he's pretty much the same in both versions. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and pretty much able to dazzle any character of the opposite gender. They actually managed to translate the detail that he's wearing a blue robe into the film. So yeah, he's played by Northern Irish actor Kenneth Branagh, if I pronounce that correctly. And basically to describe who Lockhart is as a character, he's the most self-absorbed, arrogant wizard you'll ever meet. And he makes phony Filoni look like a humble personality. I actually saw Filoni in Diagon Alley, still in his Quidditch uniform, and lying to anyone who passed him about how good he is at Quidditch. That air of cocky arrogance he expressed was nothing compared to when I passed by the bookshop and I saw Lockhart smiling at the camera. Yeah, just as the book describes, Lockhart thought of himself as hot shit, much to the contempt of every male character. It actually reminded me of when Justin Bieber was the most hated person on the planet back in 2012 when he wrote one of the worst songs ever. Everyone at my school fucking hated him minus the girls. And I even remember Roblox browser games being made with names such as Kill Justin Bieber that fulfilled every boy's personal fantasy of having that horrible excuse for a singer be rid of. Yeah, that's a personal memory of mine. But anyways, point is, Lockhart is the fucking worst. In both versions, when he spots Harry Potter, he forces him to go take a picture with him, much to Harry's discomfort. And just like Filoni pretending he gives a single fuck about the Star Wars expanded universe, Lockhart proudly announced that Harry went in specifically to buy his books and he's getting them all free of charge. You arrogant motherfucker. Yeah, he pretty much propped Harry Potter next to him to make himself look good for the Daily Prophet. Yeah, so Lockhart comes across as that overconfident jackass who can get away with being a jackass because he's famous. In the book, he also publicly announces that he'll be the next Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts. Oh wow. First we got Quirrell, who turned out to be the secondary antagonist of the previous story, and now we've got this arsehole. In what you will soon see, they keep switching out the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher every goddamn year. And thus we get someone completely different in every book. I guess that's one way to freshen up the books, by having a different professor for the same subject. And as far as I've read, each of them manages to be completely different from the last. So maybe eventually we'll get one that I actually like, because Quirrell was a complete joke, until he turned out to be the secondary antagonist. And Lockhart is completely such a self-absorbed prick. Anyways, with that being said, we've got Draco Malfoy, envious of Harry, and he starts giving him the business. In both versions, he starts insulting Harry, and when Ginny tries to back up Harry, Draco makes a remark about Harry's got himself a girlfriend, which in the book makes Ginny go red. Then when Ron tries to argue back at Malfoy, his face goes red too, when Draco mocks him for being dirt poor after being forced to buy all of Lockhart's books. Then we've got Lucius Malfoy's first film appearance, As some of you will know, he's played by Jason Isaacs, who also voiced the Grand Inquisitor in Star Wars Rebels, only to be replaced in the shitty live-action Kenobi show. What some of you may not know is that the Grand Inquisitor wasn't his first relation to Star Wars. His likeness from the Harry Potter movie specifically was used for the crime lord Ty Bazan, who appeared in the Empire at War expansion Forces of Corruption. Of course, Ty Bazan was voiced by someone else, but you get the point. I actually wonder if anyone told him while he was voicing the Grand Inquisitor that his likeness was already used for a different character. Probably not. We all know how much Filoni brushes the EU under the rug. But then again, maybe it was Isaacs who let LucasArts use his likeness for the character to begin with. I don't actually know what the story there was, other than Ty Bazan being physically based on Lucius Malfoy. Anyways, in the film, he snarkily greets Harry and has a look at his scar that Voldemort gave him. He even makes a remark towards Harry saying the Dark Lord's name openly, that he's either very brave or very stupid. In both versions, however, Arthur Weasley steps in, and that's where the pair trash talk each other. Lucius mocking Arthur for being so poorly paid at the Ministry, and even a part where Lucius expresses his contempt for muggles, and tells Arthur why he would even associate with those kinds of people. But Arthur is able to keep his cool in the movie. In the book, he flat out lunges at Lucius, hoping to make him pay for all the crap he said about his family, and by extension the Muggles. It actually takes Hagrid to break both of them up. And the rest of the chapter is basically focused on Molly calling out her husband for not restraining himself. I did want to note here that a moderate change to the source material in general is the fact that Hermione is the one who says fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself, instead of Dumbledore who gave it in the Philosopher's Stone book, which is a very weird change. And honestly, it would have been preferable if Dumbledore said it. That's something that's more for the mentor of a story to say. And that's chapter 4. So yeah, the two versions end differently as the book results in a heated brawl. The film in its own context, however, with that snarky back and forth with Lucius and Arthur, I thought was pretty well done. The music and the stares the two give each other, it's pretty compelling to watch. A lot of the memorable scenes appear to be the ones where it's only the adult actors going back and forth on screen. Yeah, as I said, the grown-ups outclass the children in acting skills. At the very least, you do get an aura of who's higher in authority when one of the adults are talking down to a younger character. While exclusive to the movie, I also like the part where Lucius speaks to Harry. So yeah. As for what's before, the shop that Harry appeared in onwards had great set design. The creepy wizards were as creepy as they should have been, and so on and so forth. I like it. While the bridge, they got all the key information out to progress the story, while still having tons of personality to it. Even though they cut his actual first book scene, Lucius in his film introduction was pretty spot on. So that's all I wanted to say about it. Lucius was a great character introduction in both versions. What's any more to it? So let's move on to chapter 5, titled The Whomping Willow. And basically, the book describes how the summer holidays ended, all before the next day, where it's time to go straight to King's Cross Station. There's actually 2 delays, one of which being Ginny forgetting her diary, which I wonder what that book had written in it. But anyways, aside from minor, inconsequential details, they make it to King's Cross Station, and this is where we return to what the movie shows. The film wisely cuts straight to King's Cross after the confrontation with Lucius Malfoy. So basically in both versions, the Weasley family, along with Harry, are eager to catch the Hogwarts Express before it's too late, just like last year, and pretty much adapted straight from the book. Everyone except Ron and Harry goes through platform 9 3/4. Then it's Ron and Harry's turn, and their objective is simple: run through the brick wall without any of the muggles noticing. How hard could it be?
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
Yeah, so just like those epic fail home videos, the invisible gateway is now suddenly solid brick again. In both versions, they cause quite a commotion, and a guard even asks the pair what the hell they're doing, with Harry's improvised excuse that they lost control of the trolleys. Perfectly adapted after that is the clock going to 11 o'clock, indicating that the Hogwarts Express is leaving, and they're too late. The pair, of course, panic, Ron realizes that if the gateway's shut to them, it probably is to anyone on the other side, including his parents, who went through with Ginny. Of course, the solution to their problem isn't the best idea in the world. And Ron then has a light bulb go off in his head. Well, actually not, because light bulbs are Muggle technology, but you get the point. Anyways, Ron figures they can use the car to get to Hogwarts. However, their plan was very poorly thought out. In both book and movie, they barely talk about what they're gonna do to evade the Muggles' detection. They don't even think to drive to an isolated area before flying. Or in the movie, Harry reminds Ron to turn on the invisibility button while they're already in the air. And it's like, why the hell didn't you do that earlier? I guess this is a legitimate problem with the writing of this particular book. Even in an initial panic, both characters surely should have known better than to risk exposing the existence of flying cars to all the Muggles. To be fair, in the book, they do turn on the invisibility button before they fly up. Although something that just sprung to mind, aren't invisibility items extremely rare? Where the hell did Arthur Weasley get the resources to enchant the car to turn invisible? I guess it doesn't matter that much, because in the book, the car actually physically reappears after a while, where the Muggles who look up can see it. In both versions, however, they shoot up to the clouds, and unfortunately, they don't see the ghosts of Paul Walker or Rupert, and they actually end up tailing the Hogwarts Express all the way to Hogwarts. The book describes the pair using a compass and checking on Hogwarts Express every half an hour to ensure they're going the right way. Otherwise, they stick up to above the clouds where no one can see them. Harry and Ron are personally enjoying themselves, and Harry even thinks about how jealous Fred and George will be, where unlike all those losers taking the train, they'll park the car smoothly in front of Hogwarts Castle. Yeah, they think they're gonna be so badass coming into Hogwarts on a flying car instead of a train. Eventually though, in the book, the trip becomes more and more dull, just like it would be if they were in fact taking a flight on a plane. Yeah, when you take off it's exciting. Eventually though, in the book, the trip becomes more and more dull, just like it would be if they were in fact taking a flight on a plane. This is unironically relatable, despite the context of magic at play. Now, something exclusive to the movie is adding some excitement and action to make the trip more entertaining. I suppose they thought the way they got to Hogwarts in the book was too uneventful, which, to be fair, it is something they could get away with changing. So the screenwriters, or whoever the hell was responsible, decided to do this. In the film, the boys decide to lower themselves to where the train tracks are. I will say that the special effects for the car are actually pretty good and fit in more seamlessly than the first film's effects. It's not 100% perfect, but you'd have to squint to find a problem with it, honestly. Point is, they foolishly go a step above the tracks. And then when they try to listen out for the Hogwarts Express, they slowly turn their heads right after Ron makes that stupid face we're all familiar with, and they both yell as they're forced to get out of the way of the train. I will say that the yells are not as intense or sincere sounding as they could be. I will say that brief moment they're yelling, it sounded exactly like Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Bill and Ted are dead.
The car goes off balance and it flips around numerous times, and during all this, Harry almost flies out of the car. I remember seeing something similar with Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, and in fact, let's play some of the music from that series, and I'll demonstrate how well it fits. What did I tell ya? It fits perfectly. Bruce Geller would be proud. Anyways, Ron manages to help Harry get up, and that's the sequence. And they presumably have a smooth rest of the way trip to Hogwarts. Now let me tell you, as entertaining as this was, it doesn't add much to the movie. And in fact, I recall a bunch of things they put in the Chamber of Secrets film that was kinda stupid, and this is one of them. As I said, they must have found the following the train stuff too boring for the film, so they decided to have Harry and Ron put themselves in needless danger just to entertain the audience. And this wasn't in the book. In fact, I almost imagine maybe they could have diverted time to something else. I counted how much of the movie this took up, and it's almost 2 minutes. 1 minute and 51 seconds to be exact. Roughly from the time they got up in the clouds to the time they cut to nighttime and nearly approaching Hogwarts. 2 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, but remember that the movie only has so much time, so maybe they could have used those 2 minutes better. My suggestion is for something in the middle or towards the end of the book. The point I'm making is that this edition, while somewhat derivative of the source material, using the setup of Harry and Ron panicking and using the flying car to get to school, this was completely thrown in for action and drama's sake, and it doesn't add a lot to the story. I guess the scene is a meme amongst Harry Potter fans, and Ron does that iconic cringe face he's known for, but meme ability isn't enough to sell me on this creative decision. While I think the rest of the movie previously was spot on with what to adapt and what to cut out, this felt like something that didn't add anything and was a complete waste. Especially when those 2 minutes could have been used for scenes actually in the book. I think if I were to be objective, the Chamber of Secrets movie is inferior to the first one, but not to the point that it drags down the whole series. I think the Chamber of Secrets is still a good movie. So back to what both versions show, when night falls and they're just about to get to Hogwarts Castle, the car starts to fail on them. Yeah, the car is pretty much a sentient creature almost, as Ron and Harry try to force it to keep going, and they start falling towards the lake. The engine pretty much dies around this time, and in the movie, this is where Ron breaks his wand, where it snaps in half like celery. Until then, I didn't realize that wands were easily breakable. But anyways, as you probably know, in both versions, they end up crashing in the middle of a tree. And before Book Harry can even assure Ron that they'll be able to fix it at school, the pair are attacked by the tree they just crashed on. So yeah, in both versions mutually, the pair are attacked by the tree, which lands branches on the car, presumably trying to kill them. As you might have guessed, this is the Whomping Willow, the namesake of the chapter. As pretty much shown in both versions, Harry yells at Ron to use the car as the engine returns to functionality, and the pair narrowly escape. A pointless detail I might as well point out is how they actually reversed in the book to get away, but fast forwarded in the movie after they had already fallen off the willow to prevent themselves from being further pummeled and potentially crushed by the huge branches still attacking them. By now, the car is absolutely fed up with the pair, proceeding to open its doors wide open, launching the pair of them out on opposite sides, before ejecting all their crap, such as bags and pet cages and whatnot, all before the car drives itself away, and proceeds to go deep into the dark forest, and yes, I'm using the movie's name for the forest still, all ending off with Ron openly stating that his dad's going to kill him. So basically entering the inside of the castle has yet 2 separate versions, both of which lead to the same outcome. In the book, Harry and Ron manage to make it to the Great Hall, in which they peer inside, seeing all the first years, including Ginny, in line to be sorted to their new houses. Harry also notices all the teachers in their appropriate positions, except for Severus Snape, who is completely missing from his chair. When Harry points this out, the two endlessly speculate that Snape must have been sacked, or kicked out, or he resigned. But then,
Speak of the devil!
Snape announces his presence right behind them. This time Snape is happier than ever, with a more sinister grin than the Joker, before he forces the pair to follow him. Now in the movie, they don't even make it to the Great Hall, because they come across Filch, who just like Snape in the book, grins evilly, and remarks how this may just be their last night in the castle. This is a very inconsequential change, because they do lead to the same outcome, and I'm guessing they maybe wanted to give Filch more screen time in the film continuity, but who knows. It is said throughout the series that the only one Filch seems to like is Snape, and vice versa. So while Snape or Filch leads them away from the Great Hall into the dungeon depending on the version, the film in particular does show Snape in the very next scene after they're caught by Filch. In both versions, Snape confronts the both of them on what they did, but when it comes to Snape's persona in both versions, they're actually different. As I indicated earlier, book Snape is more evilly grinning at the prospect of the both of them getting expelled, and his bias towards the pair takes over. However, in the movie, Snape is more angry than anything, and he actually behaves more reasonably in the movie. Like, the book and film has Snape present the same thing to them in the same way. The Evening Prophet saying that at least 7 muggles spotted the flying car, to the point of being utterly convinced it wasn't a hallucination. And they obviously proceeded to tell others nearby, and as you might expect, it was a nightmare for the Ministry of Magic to clean up, mind wiping at least 7 people. The book also emphasizes how much trouble Arthur Weasley is in if anyone finds out that he bewitched the car. Anyhow, he also grandstands them both for damaging the Whomping Willow, which has been there for centuries. And they actually include Ron blurting out that the Willow did more damage to them before Snape silences him in the movie. So the dialogue is pretty close. Snape in both versions says that if the pair of them were in Slytherin, he would have made sure that they would both go home tonight. But as they're both Gryffindors, that decision does not lie with him. Instead, he's gonna fetch the person who does have the power, Professor McGonagall. Now, in the movie, McGonagall and Dumbledore both enter straight in afterwards, but in the book, it's a solid 10 minutes of waiting for the both of them, as we're reminded that while McGonagall is far more fair, she is still incredibly strict, with McGonagall coming in first, followed by Dumbledore a minute later. In the book specifically, Harry and Ron explain how the barrier wouldn't open, thereby they missed the train and panicked, so they used the car instead. McGonagall then points out why they couldn't just use Hedwig to write them a message, and they could have solved the problem that way instead. Yeah, Harry realizes that that was the very obvious solution they ignored. Well, basically in both versions, Ron assumes that they're gonna be kicked out, and says that they'll go get their bags, except it turns out they aren't being expelled. Instead, they get a slap on the wrist with a detention, a far less severe punishment. Snape is actually described as looking like Christmas had been cancelled. Yeah, that's how the book describes it. There's actually a bit the book has that the movie doesn't, with additional details. Harry points out that since the term hasn't started, they can't technically have lost Gryffindor any points, but on top of the detention, McGonagall will be writing to both of their guardians. And here you can tell that Ron is extra screwed, but Harry isn't fazed by this at all. The Dursleys will just be disappointed that the Whomping Willow hadn't crushed him and ended the series in its tracks. Also, when Ron asks, McGonagall says that Ginny is in Gryffindor. They're both then ordered to eat the leftover feast food in the dungeon, and then go straight to the dormitories. I should also add in what Dumbledore says. He doesn't really do much, but basically he is very disappointed. And the book even describes this soft question in a disappointed tone as being worse than straight up yelling in Harry's eyes. Yeah, as you might expect, Dumbledore always asks calmly.
He said it! He said it!
The point is, the rest of the chapter concerns the two speculating why they couldn't get past the barrier. It's obviously because of Dobby though. Then when they finished all their food, they get stuck, not knowing the password to the common room. And then Hermione shows up, bailing them out by giving the password Wattlebird. Well, actually, she doesn't give it to them to help them out, because she's pretty much as annoyed as Professor McGonagall was. You might expect from Hermione's attitude that every other Gryffindor will rip on them, right? Instead, as soon as they enter the common room, everyone's treating the both of them like hot shit, and the only person sharing Hermione's reaction is Percy, the Gryffindor prefect. They both excuse themselves to the sleeping area, and the rest of the second year Gryffindors follow them in, amazed. And that's pretty much the end of chapter 5 pretty much. Now, I described a lot of stuff the movie didn't show, but I think the chapter was pretty good. The stakes of the chapter pretty much became whether they stay at Hogwarts, and while you know deep down they're gonna be fine, it's still a scary thought to give people. Concerning this chapter and the last one, you do have to wonder why they immediately jumped to thinking that using the car was the solution. As the book points out, it's incredibly foolish. Then I actually realized that getting the two characters assigned detentions actually progresses the plot, but why it couldn't be for another reason, I don't know. So that's a bit of iffy writing there. I guess the main notable change is unironically Snape's persona, when bringing out the Evening Prophet, and I have to say that his book reaction was more in line with the character. In the movie, they gave Snape, an unlikable character, more leniency almost, as his angry outburst was more justified than his book reaction of evil grins and hoping they'd get kicked out. You might gather from the movie that Snape really did care about Hogwarts, and by extension, the Wizarding World's rules. So with that being said, however, that's pretty much how Chapter 5 ends. The movie otherwise did faithfully adapt this scene, and cut the crap that didn't really matter to the overall story. And with that being said, however, I think it's time we turn over to the next chapter. So next we turn to Chapter 6. And you know you're in for an enjoyable read when you see that it's called Gilderoy Lockhart. I groaned as soon as I saw that was the current chapter, but oh well, that's life. First off, they actually rearranged the scenes a bit. In the movie, the following scene is during the Herbology class with Professor Sprout. In the book, well, it actually starts here, where they're all at the Great Hall, and the Weasley family owl drops a letter straight to Ron, but not without crashing it like it always does. In the book, Hermione is in the middle of reading one of Lockhart's books right before Ron gets the letter from the owl. Now, if you've seen the movie, you know what's coming. Ron quietly says that he's been sent to Howler, and of course Harry has no idea what that is. And they preserve a line from the book where Neville outright says that ignoring the Howler is a terrible idea. So Ron opts to open it reluctantly, in which the voice of Molly Weasley openly yells at him through the magical letter and rips him a new one. She is disgusted and yells at him that his father is facing an inquiry at work and every angry mother complaint in the book. Although something that the movie throws in that accounts for a lack of time is Molly then addressing Ginny and congratulating her for making it into Gryffindor. Then the letter turns to ash. Well, in the book it does, because in the movie it rips itself to pieces. And Ron's reaction in the movie is just as awkward as ever. Ha! You can't ever go wrong when you tell Rupert Grint to make a worried face, because he goes really overboard. Anyways, as I mentioned previously, the following scene in the book is a reversal of the one in the movie, and that's the Herbology class. Now, Lockhart's first appearance in this chapter in the book is when Lockhart accompanies Professor Sprout to the class. In the movie, Lockhart shows up a bit later, but Sprout was mostly dealing with the Whomping Willow, which Harry and Ron kind of feel extra bad for. Now, Professor Sprout is pretty much as described in the book. A short, stumpy-shaped witch with a love for the earth, having dirt on her constantly, and I mean the physical kind. Before the class starts, Lockhart has a word with Harry, in which he assumes that he was the inspiration for Harry to fly into the school on a car, and is interrupted by Lockhart when trying to speak up. He proceeds to say that when he was his age, he was just like him, a nobody, and you can infer that Lockhart's a little bit obsessed with Harry and his fame, being a glory hog himself. So then in both the movie and the book, we get the Herbology class, which involves a plant known as mandrakes. To absolutely nobody's surprise, Hermione is the one who can identify what a mandrake is and what it does, along with earning Gryffindor 10 points. So basically, they're going to be handling mandrakes, although they are younger ones that aren't fatal, but still result in a knockout if you don't use proper equipment. The class are instructed to take some earmuffs and place them firmly between the both of their ears. Now, Harry, not knowing what to expect, has an audible gasp when Professor Sprout pulls out this thing. Yeah, it's pretty much as described in the book. An ugly baby mandrake that cries out loud at the top of its lungs. Something the movie throws in is having Neville, the clumsy one, faint onto the ground, having failed to put his earmuffs on properly. Although despite Seamus pointing out what happened, Sprout tells everyone to leave him there until class ends. Then it was up to me, who came in with the following class, to bring Neville to the hospital wing. I initially didn't want to, but Sprout offered to give Ravenclaw 5 points if I carried him to the hospital wing. So I complied. And that was the biggest mistake I could have made, because goddamn was Neville heavy. I had to carry him across the castle to the hospital wing, and I almost collapsed myself from exhaustion. But then I realized I had potions class in 2 minutes, so I rushed as fast as I could, and I arrived too fucking late, and Snape retracted 10 points off Ravenclaw. He was not sympathetic to the fact that I was carrying Neville to the hospital wing, and I'm not surprised because he hates Neville for his clumsiness. I should also mention how, just like Malfoy, he seems to really like Dave Filoni. It might just be his second favourite student. I mean, he keeps giving Filoni points for flimsy reasons to make up for the points he lost Slytherin in other fields. Like, he gave Filoni 50 points for some reason, he didn't really explain why. Then Filoni lost those 50 points in Transfiguration by talking back to Professor McGonagall, which was, of course, a bad idea. Seriously, by reading the first book, you might assume that Slytherin finally lost their 6-year streak of House Cup victories because of Harry Potter, but I think the real problem was because of Filoni. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. The point is, in the book, we also meet a side character, Justin Flinch Fletchley, a Hufflepuff second-year student. While he doesn't do much in the story, he is introduced as being friendly to Harry and his friends, greeting him as the boy who lived. By the way, this isn't an official Funko Pop. It's basically a custom one I had made based on his description in the book, and also how he appears as a background character in the movie. Then it's off for Harry to Transfiguration class in the book, under Professor McGonagall. Now, it's described here that since the summer holidays were so long, Harry didn't quite remember what he was taught last year. Probably didn't help that he had no magical contact over the summer. Anyways, they're supposed to transform a beetle, and the least successful of the class is, of course, Ron Weasley. Yeah, since his one snap, he outright fails the class. Something that both versions show is Ron trying to fix his wand with some tape, which doesn't help at all. So exclusive to the book again is the lunch break, in which we find out the defense against the dark arts class is next, under Gilderoy Lockhart. Now, one of the book's gags is the fact that Hermione literally crossed her timetable with Gilderoy Lockhart with hearts.
I am not shitting you.
And then it's the dark arts class. Now, the class is presented in the movie, but one moderate difference between both versions is how they introduce a certain Gryffindor first year. You see, in the book, this is where Harry notices a boy he saw previously at the sorting ceremony when he was peering into the Great Hall. The boy actually approaches him in the courtyard before the dark arts class and introduces himself as Colin Creevey. For some reason, his surname always reminded me of KFC potato and gravy. Anyways, Colin Creevey is described as a small, mousy-haired boy, and he carries around a camera with him always. In the movie, Colin is introduced right before Ron gets the Howler. The dialogue is pretty much the same, as well as the fact that Colin has an obsessive admiration for Harry, which will be a consistent running gag in all the books. In the movie, he's played by Hugh Mitchell, and I'd say the casting was very spot on. That's pretty much how I would imagine Colin Potato and Gravy Creevey looking like. In both versions, he announces that he's in Gryffindor too. Although exclusive to the book, he wants a picture with Harry, and we learn in the book too that his father is a milkman. Gee, I haven't heard that job title in years. It's really old-fashioned now, and I guess it's maybe been an obsolete job because most people can order milk and whatever the fuck else they need through the Uber Eats app. Yeah, it was good enough for Tom Felton, wasn't it? Man, the Muggles have gone really far from when this book takes place to today, haven't they? And speaking of Tom Felton, we've then got Draco Malfoy being a jackass again, by taunting Harry that he's so famous that he's signing autographs right after Colin asks for one on top of the picture with him. He then insults Ron, and before he pulls out his wand to curse Malfoy, Lockhart walks in on the confrontation, and you can probably guess the main thing he heard. Autographs. He escorts Harry away and starts giving him advice about autographs and how giving them out at the start of his career isn't a good idea and blah 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 blah. So yeah, this is the start of Lockhart's afternoon class, and as you might expect, the two scenes start differently. The book describes how Harry actually took one of the back seats and dumped all of Lockhart's books under him. Now in the movie, Lockhart walks in, announcing all of his special titles, him being a self-proclaimed Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times in a row. Yeah, we get it, buddy. You're a narcissist. Now, are you gonna teach Harry and his peers defense against the dark arts crap? He also says this in the book, along with remarking that he didn't defeat the Banded Banshee by smiling at it, before revealing a cage of Cornish pixies. Something which Seamus is absolutely unintimidated by. Then, being the idiotic dolt that he is, he lets them out, and they wreak havoc, destroying pages of his books, and two of them grabbing Neville by the ear and carrying him up. Lockhart is absolutely useless, because one of the pixies snatches his wand and uses it to snap the chains to a skeleton hanging on the ceiling, further causing destruction. In fact, after that point, he asks the main trio to solve his problem before he hides in his office. Hermione solves the problem with the Immubulus spell, and they close the scene with Neville, still strung up, asking why it's always him that gets the worst of everything. Now, in regards to what the book shows, one thing I kinda wish they kept in was Lockhart's little quiz, which was meant to test everyone on how much they read his books. Unsurprisingly, they're all questions that are all about Gilderoy Lockhart specifically, like, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? Or, how long is Gilderoy Lockhart's dick and how many women has he slept with? Okay, that second one I made up, but you get the idea. Harry is startled at how self-absorbed Lockhart is. And after being forced to answer 54 questions across 3 sides of paper, the results come in. And you want to know who got everything correct? Hermione. And it's not because she studied hard at all. No, it was because she has a crush on this phony fraud who dared to call himself a teacher. So anyways, after that, we get what the movie shows with the Pixies, and it's pretty much as described, down to the detail of Lockhart having his wand snatched and ditching the trio to solve the problem he created. I guess what's added is Hermione defending Lockhart's laziness by saying that he's just trying to give them some hands-on experience. With that being said, that's the end of chapter 6. And yeah, my impression of Lockhart hasn't changed. What a joke of a teacher. Lazy, cowardly, and cheap. What an egomaniac. He dominated this chapter. And I have to say, what a good job at presenting an unlikable character in both versions. What they included is faithfully adapted, and pretty much how I imagined it in the book. That joke of a quiz all about Lockhart really was a silly but effective part to include to show how Lockhart is such a goddamn self-absorbed prick. When the chapter ends, you're left thinking about how the defense against the dark arts position is pretty much cursed to the point that we get absolute arse clowns as the teacher each year. And we're only on the 2nd year. The book then enters a bit of a darker tone with chapter 7, titled Mudbloods and Murmurs, with the book describing the rest of Harry's week, in which he openly tries to avoid Lockhart and Colin Creevey, both of which are annoying for the opposite reasons, and he and his friends plan to meet Hagrid on Saturday. That morning, however, he is woken up by Oliver Wood, who forces Harry to get up, dress himself, grab his shit, and meet him on the Quidditch pitch. As well as that, Colin Creevey annoys him while he's making his way to the field. Harry really tries to brush him off as he asks question after question as Harry tries to make his way to his team to practice. Oliver Wood then starts blabbering on to the team when they're all there about how he's got a brand new strategy and starts eating all their ears off about it. Once he's done, he points out how they couldn't win the Quidditch Cup last year because Harry was unconscious for the match. Yeah, that's something you never get from watching the movies. How the Quidditch matches actually went against all the other teams and the effect it had on the House Cup. When they get to go outside, they're actually smeared by a brighter sun, because that's how long they were inside. Finally, he sees Ron and Hermione sitting on the side, and he decides to start practicing, using his broom and flying around like a natural. But then the worst people ever show up. The Slytherins. And this is where we return to the movie, except this stuff takes place in the courtyard. The scene is slightly rearranged where Oliver Wood leads the Gryffindor team to the pitch, only to bump into Marcus Flint and the Slytherins. In both versions, Oliver asks what the hell Flint's doing with his team, and Flint responds that they've got special permission from Professor Snape to practice, with a note as proof basically telling the Gryffindors to go fuck themselves. The reason they've got special privilege too is because they've got to train their new Seeker. And in a dramatic fashion, all the teammates move aside for the Seeker to be revealed to the Gryffindors. It's Draco Malfoy. Oh my god. That means that Filoni's finally kicked off the Quidditch team? Good riddance. I actually saw him in the Great Hall crying like a baby shortly after this. He was still wearing his Quidditch uniform, and he was making such a noise that none of the other Slytherins sat anywhere near him. He didn't even care when the bloody Baron flew close to him. Eventually, Professor McGonagall told him to shut the fuck up, and she docked Slytherin 10 points if he didn't stop being so noisy. He of course kept on crying, completely oblivious to McGonagall's threat, and yeah, he lost Slytherin another 10 points. Or at least I would say that, if Slytherin had any points to begin with. It's still 0. Yeah, so Draco Malfoy's the Slytherin Seeker now, not Filoni. This means that Slytherin might actually start getting better at the game. While I was happy that Draco Malfoy became the Seeker because it meant Filoni got kicked off the team, given there can only be one Seeker, Harry and his team are less than pleased. But on top of Draco Malfoy replacing phony Filoni as the Seeker, turns out that his dad Lucius, being as wealthy as he is, bought the newest edition Nimbus 2001s for every member of the Slytherin team. And that right there is just cheap. Hermione rightfully points out that they just bought their way into improving their odds rather than actual skill. I also have to point out how unfair this is in another way. That being that the school doesn't have every team play on equal footing. Rather, they can just buy their own custom equipment instead of it all being provided to the school. Why the hell is this allowed? But after thinking about it for a minute, I just realized. Lucius Malfoy has some jurisdiction over Hogwarts. That's probably how he managed to provide his son and his team top grade broomsticks. Now, I don't know if Rowling actually thought about this as hard as I am, but at least the writing is intricate and well thought out. So after Hermione calls out Malfoy and the Slytherins for being cheap, Malfoy immediately calls Hermione a mudblood, and in the book, this starts a fist fight between both teams who attack each other, with Fred and George making the first move. In the movie, however, the only form of attack that happens is Ron pulling out his wand to curse Malfoy, to which it backfires, and he ends up cursing himself to vomit slugs for a few hours. I like how gross it's presented in the movie. Slimy, sloopy sound effects, and what Ron gags at is putrid. In both versions, the Slytherins burst into laughter, and Harry and Hermione carry Ron away, straight to Hagrid. They even preserve Colin being an annoying twat, and taking a photo amongst this whole mess. So anyways, cut to the trio going to Hagrid's place. Exclusive to the book is Lockhart dicking around like he usually does, but they cut that out. Anyways, in both versions, Hagrid gets a bucket out for Ron, as he gags out the slugs. Book Hagrid also talks shit about Lockhart, and it's even pointed out how out of character this is for Hagrid typically. But anyways, on to the trio explaining what happened in both mutual versions, and how low Malfoy went with his words. He called Hermione a mudblood, and Hagrid is shocked. Turns out mudblood is a Wizarding World slur. An interesting change between both versions is how Book Hermione strangely hasn't heard the term before and doesn't know what it means, while Film Hermione knows exactly what it means. Mudblood is basically a slur directed towards wizards and witches who don't have any wizarding parents. Both of Hermione's parents, after all, are muggle dentists who clean teeth for a living. And Malfoy came up with the most insulting name he could come up with. Now, the following discussion points out how the Malfoy family think that they're better than everyone else just because they're pure-blood wizards. And the fact is that blood status means practically nothing, because Neville, for example, is a pure-blood, and he's a complete joke of a wizard, while Muggle-born Hermione is a highly accomplished witch. And I recall Book Lucius even scolded Malfoy for having lower scores than her. This is the wizarding equivalent of bigotry, essentially. It all revolves around blood status of wizards and witches. Now, we all know that bigotry against people of different cultures or ethnicities or religions or whatever is really stupid. But bigotry isn't supposed to make sense. It's either based on ignorance or fear. For example, Jews are some of the most targeted people in history. Why exactly? Because a lot of them tended to be really wealthy and successful, and other people flat out resented that, and bought into stereotypes that Jews were just greedy and evil. That's what Silly Mustache Man believed in. He bought into Jewish stereotypes early in his life, and grew an irrational hatred of them. When the Nazis took power in 1933, their oppressive policies and laws were completely misguided, As I understand, most ethnic Jews in Germany had completely converted to Christianity, and most Jews only found out they were Jews when Silly Mustache Man's regime told them they were, and that they were utterly inferior. Yeah, it didn't matter to Silly Mustache Man that most of the people he was oppressing didn't actually know that they were actually Jewish until his regime did some tests and told them so. It just mattered that they were of Jewish ancestry, even though most of them were converted Christians who considered themselves Germans first and Jews second. Then, to make things even more pathetic, they actually had to start classifying what a Jew actually was. And basically, they had to start being a little lenient to some individuals based on their genes, such as half or quarter Jews as they called them. Because again, any Jewish people were so deeply entrenched in German society that they spent their whole lives without knowing they were Jews or had any sort of ties to Judaism. You can probably piece together that he thought that Jewish people were evil by nature without a single exception, and began to oppress them. That didn't even make any sense, because as a lot of history buffs may know, Silly Mustache Man was actually fond of a family doctor of his who happened to be Jewish, and that just opens a whole can of worms. It can actually bring into question whether Silly Mustache Man actually hated Jewish people, or if he just used fear against them to benefit himself and his regime. I mean, he clumped a lot of people as inferior. Now, I bring all this history up because it's very relevant to the Harry Potter series in terms of symbolism. The Wizarding World has its own stand-in for racism pretty much, which ties heavily to blood status, just for different reasons. And Voldemort is, without better words, a fascist at its extreme. Now, I wanted to talk about the stuff that's directly fascism later in the series. For now, I just wanted to talk about Muggleism, if that's what it's called. Let's just assume that it is. It's a delusional mistrust of Muggles. And it's clear throughout the series that pureblood supremacists don't even know squat about Muggles, and seem to clump them all as the same. Of course, most wizards don't look down on Muggles, because they may be half-bloods themselves, or they've associated with Muggles before, whether it be through a Muggle-born wizard or witch, or maybe actually just taking a walk in a Muggle street and seeing for themselves what Muggles are like. Muggles have achieved a lot in their own history. Again, assuming that the Harry Potter universe works in parallel with our own, the Cold War had just ended favorably for the world, because everyone managed to get through it without destroying the entire planet in the process. Just imagine Draco Malfoy trying to comprehend all this. His head would explode. So anyways, Ron as a pureblood does stick up for Hermione, as does Harry, as does Hagrid. And they overlook Malfoy's petty insult pretty quickly. Now, with that being said, Hagrid, exclusive to the book, then gets them outside to show them a batch of large pumpkins he's been growing, presumably with magic. It's brought up again that Hagrid had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year for a reason unknown to Harry. And oh boy, are we about to find out eventually. So anyways, after this, McGonagall approaches both Harry and Ron and informs them about their detentions happening this evening. However, they get different punishments, and it's almost a curse to both of them. Ron will accompany Argus Filch and clean up the trophy room without using any magic. No! While Harry will help Professor Lockhart write off fan mail. No! Yeah, the two in fact want to switch the punishments, but can't. You see, Harry would have tolerated the Filch punishment because the Dursleys forced him to clean all the time. It'd be no hassle aside from being boring. And Ron would have been better off writing Lockhart's fan mail. It's actually mentioned by McGonagall that Lockhart specifically requested Harry for the job of answering them. Anyhow, their afternoons before their insufferable chores suck, and then the pair part ways, with Harry being forced to go to Lockhart's classroom, in which he's forced to do exactly what I mentioned, answering fan mail for Lockhart. This is where we return to the movie, with Harry in the middle of writing the fan mail. I guess it's another reason to dislike Lockhart, because he delegated the fan mail to someone else. You know, at least Sir Alec Guinness threw out his fan mail because he didn't feel like answering it, because it all would have just been about Obi-Wan, a character he hated. So there Harry sits with Lockhart in both book and film, bored out of his mind. In fact, in the book, it's described that the hours, quote, snailed by, which which is a very expressive way to describe it. A key strength of these books is that they always create a strong impression out of anything it describes, whether it be characters, events, or even the passage of time here. Harry nearly dies of boredom, writing letter after letter for Lockhart's fans. A couple of the lines from this part are actually adapted into the movie, so it's still expressive they can translate exact dialogue. Then all of a sudden, Harry hears an ice-cold venomous voice, like that of a talking snake, telling Harry to come to him and he'll tear and kill him. Startled, he yells out, to which Lockhart indicates that he didn't hear anything. But fortunately, Lockhart states that Harry's been writing fan mail for 4 hours straight and so he can go sleep now. Harry doesn't hear any of the voices again for the rest of the night. In the book, Harry briefly tells Ron about what he heard, right after Ron vents about accidentally vomiting slugs on one of the trophies, and having to re-clean it. So yeah, that's chapter 7. A lot to unpack. You've already heard my commentary on wizard bigotry, so as for the rest of it, it's great. The detention actually served a purpose, even if the means of getting the detention was a bit contrived, with Harry and Ron's solution to drive the flying car to school. Rowling gave Harry and Ron the exact opposite of what they would want as a punishment, with Lockhart especially being such an insufferable narcissist. So with that being said, I have good things to say about the general stage of the story, in both versions. I also want to note that we're only a quarter of the way through the story. Maybe technically a third because I'm including credits, but we've spoken about a lot so far, haven't we? Well, I have absolutely no intention of trimming the length of the script. I'm gonna keep going in as much detail as possible. And here comes one of the biggest deviations from the book, and that's chapter 8. The Death Day Party. Right off the bat, I inferred it had something to do with one of the ghosts celebrating the day they died, which of course is silly, but they do make light of it. So in the book, October arrives, and it's very, very rainy. As it is October, it's the spooky holiday soon, and Harry is about to spend it in an incredibly shitty way. Aside from hardcore Quidditch practice, with Fred and George spying on the Slytherin team in downtime to report the speed of the brooms they now possess, Harry comes across nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, who in the films is played by John Cleese. He's more of a minor character in the films, but here, in this chapter alone, he is the central character. Nick is mumbling to himself something before Harry goes to greet him. Nick is incredibly distraught that he's been rejected from a club known as the Headless Hunt, which, in case it's not obvious, he was rejected from it because he's nearly headless. Yeah, 90% of his neck severed upon death isn't good enough. He even recalls the day he died, having been cut with a blade over 40 times during his execution. I also suppose there's no way to cut all of his head off posthumously. He's stuck as nearly headless Nick. Wow, I didn't realize being nearly headless would actually lead somewhere. Now that's extremely subtle. Then Mrs. Norris, Filch's bloody cat, shows up, and Nick warns Harry that Filch is in a sour mood, and if he sees Harry as dirty as he is, he'll be done for. So Harry takes the cue and bolts from the area. But then,
surprise, motherfucker!
Filch in all his hideous glory shows up in front of Harry trying to leave the area. And Filch foresees Harry to follow him, and that's where we get the introduction to his office. A damply lit room smelling of fried fish, with records on the side of everyone Filch has ever punished, with Fred and George having their own slot. The room also has a lot of unused torture devices on the walls. Before Filch can finish listing off Harry on paper to file out a punishment, a noise from above, obviously being Peeves the poltergeist, draws Filch away from his office, leaving Harry alone. Harry decides to wait for Filch to come back, but then he notices a purple letter on the table that stands out. Harry, thinking it must have been written by Samuel L. Jackson since purple is his favorite color, goes to open and read it. Actually, that thing about Samuel L. Jackson I made up, but still, he was drawn to opening the letter out of curiosity. It's basically a wizarding program known as Quickspell that apparently teaches lacking wizards and witches to enhance their skills. But Harry's forced to throw the letter back on the desk just as Filch comes back in with Mrs. Norris. Filch is so happy that Peeves broke something so valuable that he's hoping Dumbledore will finally call the Ghostbusters to get rid of him. But then he realizes the letter isn't in the same place he left it, and asks Harry if he read it. Harry lies a simple no, and Filch, now distracted with trying to get rid of Peeves once and for all, tells him to get out. Doing the research for this video, I just realized that the quick spell thing was actually cut from the movie in a deleted scene, but since it means absolutely squat to the story, I'm not surprised they cut it out. Point is, Harry goes straight to nearly headless Nick, in which it turns out Nick got Peeves to attract Filch, and basically Harry owes him one since he didn't get detention. So Nick seizes the opportunity to ask Harry a favor. On Halloween, it will be the 500th anniversary since the day he died, and he basically wants Harry to attend his party, which will consist of all his friends, presumably deceased like he is. Harry jumps to promising that he'll go to his death day party on Halloween. Then Halloween actually arrives, and Harry realizes how much he didn't want to go to the death day party. But Hermione reminds him that he promised it to nearly headless Nick, and he was almost in tears over the prospect, so he's gotta go, pronto. At least his two friends will go with him. They go to the dungeons, with the temperature decreasing the lower they go, and basically, the party is not a fun time. It's dim for starters, and there's no food, or at least food that is edible. The Hufflepuff Fat Friar Ghost is also there for starters, and so is the Bloody Baron. And this is the introduction of a character that would be introduced many scenes later in the movie, Moaning Myrtle. Hermione starts to stress out, because she made Myrtle upset that one time she went to the girls' bathroom on the first floor, and Myrtle is the main reason nobody goes to that bathroom anymore. They back away, only to come across food that, upon approaching, smells disgusting and is literally to die for. I'm just gonna play a clip from Kitchen Nightmares that'll sum it up perfectly.
I mean, it's not even a pepper. It's rotten. I'm worried about the flies in the dining room. I know where they're fucking breeding now. It's green. It's beyond edible. It's disgusting.
So yeah, now you get the idea of the kind of stuff they were serving, because they're not that far off from the unsanitary restaurants Gordon visited. Anyways, they then encounter Peeves the Poltergeist, who overheard Hermione talk about Myrtle, so he yells Myrtle to come over.
Wow, what an asshole.
And Hermione is unable to speak to Myrtle without getting her to sob again, which she does. I have to say that Myrtle has so much self-loathing in herself, more than I do. It's almost given me a fresh perspective. I may be a fat piece of shit, but at least I'm not a ghost haunting a bathroom in a castle. So then a group of ghosts riding oh-so-dead horses arrive, and it's time for nearly headless Nick to give a Death Day speech. But whatever he was gonna say, we don't get to hear, as Harry instead hears the mysterious slithery voice again, and starts sprinting out the dungeon, straight to the first floor to follow the sound, with his two friends straight behind him. Now in the movie, it has its own version of this scene, except it's right after Harry's fan mail detention with Lockhart is over. Harry meets up with his two friends, to which they also follow Harry as he tries to follow the slithery sound. Now in both versions, Harry runs straight into one of the hallways on the second floor, and then it happens. The trio come across Mrs. Norris, seemingly dead, strung up, with a message written on the wall with blood next to her. It reads, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." Then straight afterwards, the Halloween feast ends, and every student comes waltzing in on the trio, discovering exactly what they discovered, and it's all surrounded like a crime scene. We also get Draco Malfoy in both versions proceed to read out the message, before telling Hermione that she's next, before calling her a mudblood again. And believe it or not, that's how Chapter 8 ends, with the trio suspiciously surrounded by everyone. Now this seems mostly like a world-building chapter almost. Nick's Death Day party seemed to have no purpose aside from setting up Moaning Myrtle, which I believe the film did better in a more condensed manner. I guess the stuff that can be sort of considered filler isn't boring, but it still feels like a waste of time. And there could have been a better way to weave everything into the story naturally, because this party doesn't directly lead to there being a discovery of Mrs. Norris or the bloody message. More like Harry hears a voice and is drawn away from the party. If they had trimmed nearly headless Nick out of it, it might have had a tighter pace. And that's close to what the movie did. So I unironically have to give the movie the point in this regard. The Nick stuff was just unnecessary fat that was just there for world building. And besides, they introduced Moaning Myrtle in a more effective way later movie-wise. So on to the next chapter, titled The Writing on the Wall.
Writings on the wall.
Filch sees the commotion, and seeing Mrs. Norris, he points the finger at Harry and is damn well about to snap his neck. Until Dumbledore, accompanied by a bunch of other teachers, show up to stop him before he does anything too drastic. Basically, everyone is called away, and Harry is questioned in Lockhart's office by the staff, given that's the closest. Well, in the movie, the trio who are caught in the wrong place at the wrong time are questioned right at the crime scene. However, in both versions, they realize that Mrs. Norris isn't dead. She's just frozen solid. The correct term being petrified. In both versions on top of that, Filch is super eager to get Harry expelled, pointing at him, although he comes across as more furious in the book. That was based on the performance of Stephen Fry in the audiobook, by the way. However, added context from the book also has Filch say out loud that Harry snooped through his letter and found out that he's a squib. Harry doesn't know what a squib is, and that's where Professor Snape cuts in to give his take. And in both versions, he suggests that perhaps they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, this is still extremely suspicious, which might actually be the most lenient thing he said ever in the series so far. The outcome in both is the same. Innocent until proven guilty, says Dumbledore, and Harry does not reveal the voices in his head that led him to the crime scene. Then we find out what the mandrake scene from earlier was for. It was set up for the fact that Professor Sprout could grow them and use them to unpetrify Mrs. Norris, and so the trio are let off. We get a scene in both book and movie in which Harry asks his friends if he should have told the whole story, but his friends tell him he made the right call. Hearing voices even in the wizarding world is not a good sign. Exclusive to the book is Harry asking Ron what the Chamber of Secrets is, but Ron only responds that it rings a bell, with Bill telling him a story about it. Then Harry asks what a squib is, and we learn that squibs are basically wizard-born muggles. People in the wizarding world that have no magical powers. And right off the bat, this almost feels like the Force and how it applies to genetics. Except, of course, magic is magic, and the Force is the thing that makes up the whole universe. Point is, Filch is bitter he can't magic anything. He could never learn magic, and that's what makes him so angry all the time. Anyways, with that being said, before we get to the next mutual scene the movie presents, we get the added context from the book, having the attack being talked about by the whole school. An interesting detail is how the only one distraught over Mrs. Norris, aside from Filch, is Ginny, who loves cats. Hermione's reaction is an intense increase in reading books. After doing a potions class with Snape, he goes to the library and he encounters Justin Fletchley, that Hufflepuff from earlier, who bolts as soon as he sees him. He then meets up with Ron, who is measuring his homework assigned to him by that ghost teacher, Professor Binns. Then Hermione comes by and talks to the pair about how all the history of Hogwarts books have been snagged, so she can't even read about the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. So now we return to what the movie shows, except the scene has been rearranged. In the book, the main characters attend Professor Binns' history class, and basically as he drones on and on about whatever for around half an hour, Hermione then raises her hand, and basically makes the whole class more interesting by asking Binns to tell them all about the Chamber of Secrets. Although Binns initially declines, saying that the Chamber of Secrets is a myth, not a fact, and he sticks to the facts when teaching history, Hermione counters that legends always have a basis in fact, and Binns relents. So basically, as the story goes, over 1,000 years ago on an uncertain date, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was founded by 4 wizards: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. Now, I mentioned some of this in the last video, but the expanded version explains that the four of them built the castle away from prying Muggle eyes, since you can infer they didn't look too kindly on magic back then. Point is, the four founders lived in harmony together, bringing in anyone who showed magic and teaching them in the art of magic. But then, of course, it was Salazar Slytherin who started causing problems. He wanted to be more selective of who became a wizard or witch at the school. This created a rift between Slytherin and the three other founders, and he left the school right after an argument with Godric Gryffindor. So basically, with all that confirmable information, then comes the legend. Apparently Salazar built a chamber, closed and hidden off to everyone, in which it could only be opened when a descendant of his arrives at the school, who would then unlock it and purge the school of Muggleborns with the horror within. Binns then discards the legend he just told as rubbish, and basically when Hermione gives a follow-up question about what the so-called horror is, he says it's a monster that can be unleashed by the heir. Anyways, Binns refuses to tell them anymore, and he continues the history lesson. Now, the revelation about Salazar Slytherin and the other founders does exist in the movie, but it's changed to a scene in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, and she's the one who reveals the legend when asked. Since Binns would be an unnecessary addition to the film series, I can understand the change. The same information is given. Ron, after the class in the book, starts talking shit about Salazar Slytherin and his pure blood supremacy. And when he remarks that he never would have accepted being put in Slytherin, Harry gets a flashback to when the Sorting Hat heavily considered putting him in Slytherin, before it settled on Gryffindor. This is something Harry is not willing to tell his close friends. So they return to the crime scene, and they spot a group of spiders crawling around erratically. Now, it's worth noting that this scene is adapted in the movie, however, it's done the same time as the discovery of Mrs. Norris and the blood message. I'm mentioning it now because that's when the book decided to present it. They then go into the nearby bathroom, having noticed water on the floor the night of the attack. So they go in there, and Moaning Myrtle is as sulky as ever. The trio question her on if she saw or noticed anything, but she says she didn't see anything. Then they're caught by Ron's brother Percy, who is angry that they were in the girls' bathroom and docks 5 points off Gryffindor. Now, in both versions, this is when the speculation starts on who the heir of Slytherin is. And in both versions, Ron easily concludes that it's probably Draco Malfoy. He hates Muggleborns, he was sorted in Slytherin, and it's certainly possible given his family in general. I'd also like to mention that in the movie, Malfoy followed by Crabbe and Goyle walk past the characters as they discuss this without comment, which is kind of awkward when you notice it. Now, based on how the story is being structured, it probably isn't Malfoy, and the reason why is because he's supposed to be Harry's school rival, and he has the sort of plot armor to stick around for the whole series. So it probably isn't him from the audience's perspective. It's the same sort of thing as when they suspected Snape of trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone in the last movies. So sorry, it's not going to be that obvious. I noticed while reading the series that there seems to be like a plot twist at the end of every book/movie. So they're setting us up for something we're not directly expecting. Even if I eventually catch on by the third book that they're going to keep having twist endings. I would like to say, however, that they're very mid-level twists, as they don't drastically recontextualize the story and radically change the story to the characters or the audience. It's not really on the scale of Planet of the Apes. I do, however, buy that the characters think of this. They hate Malfoy, and he's certainly a low enough person to do it, and maybe it's been a family tradition as well for him. So with that being said, Hermione devises a plan to impersonate 3 of the Slytherins, then go to their common room and speak to Malfoy, and see if he knows anything about the Chamber of Secrets. Of course, they'll need a Polyjuice potion, which will allow them to resemble all 3 Slytherins they're targeting. The obvious target for Harry and Ron are Crabbe and Goyle. A notable difference between the 2 versions is that Hermione just pulls out a book in the library and tells them about the polyjuice potion in the film, whereas in the book, the recipe for the polyjuice potion is in the restricted section, and they need a teacher to be able to grab that book. They'll need a teacher who's really boneheaded for this to work, and any attentive readers will know who this is. That's how Chapter 9 ends in both parallel versions of the story. So, a lot to unpack. This chapter was on the longer side, as it really revealed a lot about the namesake of the story. To be honest, the condensed nature of the film honestly lets me give the film a point for this. Professor McGonagall made a more interesting storyteller than Professor Binns, and that was a quality of life change. I do think Malfoy is a bit too obvious as a red herring, but it does make sense for the characters to suspect him. So overall, a very content-filled chapter, being on the longer side. And with that, we move on to Chapter 10. The Rogue Bludger, which tells us this is going to be about Quidditch. Now, I have to say that Filoni is still a bit sulky about being kicked off the Quidditch team, and in fact, he's vowed to create his own Slytherin Quidditch team, naming them the Real Slytherins. But of course, the headmaster refused his request to add a new team, so that went nowhere. I still see him go around in his Seeker uniform, and I just stare at him in disgust. I've also been seeing him talk to Malfoy about how Muggleborns aren't all bad if they're submissive shills. He explains how he sees the Muggles who watch his crappy shows and shill for them as more superior Muggles to ones who don't, like me. Yeah, sorry it took this long to mention, but I don't have any magical parents. I'm a Muggleborn. So when Malfoy wasn't insulting Harry and friends, he was going around the school, going up to different Muggleborns and calling them mudbloods, including me. I don't know why he's allowed to get away with it, because imagine if some kid at a Muggle school started yelling out that black people were the N-word. They would be expelled in an instant. But I guess Malfoy gets away with it because he's got a powerful father. But still.
It just isn't fair.
So anyways, back to the story. Harry Potter attends one of Lockhart's pretentious classes, and he by far gets the worst of it, with Lockhart retelling his bold stories while having Harry as an assistant helping him tell out the stories. He doesn't improve when the bell rings, and he assigns them all homework, that being to write a poem about him in one of his quote achievements. Basically, Harry and friends rely on the personality of Lockhart in order to get special permission, and Lockhart signs away, not thinking twice. And that's perhaps the only time he's actually an asset to anyone. Hermione also goes out of her way to defend Lockhart when Ron talks shit about him. It's described in the book that with the guarantee of privacy from sticking around in the first floor girls' bathroom with moaning Myrtle around, they study the potion required to transform into someone else. Eventually, Hermione gets to the Polyjuice Potion page, and Harry notices how the illustrations make the transforming look very painful. It's also noted how gathering all the ingredients is going to be really hard. A bunch of them they can easily get from the students' cupboard, but a few of them they'll have to steal from Professor Snape. The last ingredient, however, is going to be a piece of whoever they're trying to impersonate. And they have this joke where Ron protests that he's not going to drink Crabbe's toenails. Although Hermione says that she's just going to put the book back if they don't want to find out if Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin. So the potion, according to Hermione, is going to take around a month, which is information the movie also gives in its own parallel scene. Now, since this is the chapter dedicated to Quidditch, Harry gets up and meets up with his team, nervous as hell, as he wants to beat Slytherin so badly this time. So this is also something the movie shows, the match between Gryffindor and Slytherin, with the Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws attending as well, obviously rooting against Slytherin. Yeah, as I said, the three normal houses have a common enemy in Slytherin. In the book, Flint and Wood are forced to shake hands by Madam Hooch, in which they give each other threatening stares, and the match begins. In both versions, the Slytherin team are shown to have more efficient brooms in play, as set up earlier, with Malfoy taunting Harry, calling him Scarhead, and even the specific detail of him dodging a bludger right afterwards. But the bludger keeps going towards Harry, and he's forced to outrun it. Yeah, so it's the namesake of the chapter, as Hagrid in the movie calls it a rogue bludger, since it's literally going after Harry and Harry alone. The two beaters, Fred and George, do do try to help him in the book, trying to swing the bludger towards a different direction, except it keeps going after Harry, even if knocked off course for a few seconds. Exclusive to the book is the sky starting to rain at this time, and a timeout being called for the Gryffindors to huddle and discuss the cursed bludger and what's going on, although they reluctantly agree to let Harry deal with the bludger on his own. The movie cuts out the timeout and cuts straight to Harry and Malfoy fighting over the golden snitch. All the while the bludger is chasing Harry relentlessly. Well, actually in the book, the match is won quite fast, as Harry spots the snitch, and after the bludger breaks one of his arms, he dives towards Malfoy's location and manages to grip the snitch, all before winning Gryffindor the game. In the movie, this is actually where things are extended. Yeah, who knew that the movie would last longer than something in the book? Point is, Harry and Malfoy go under the stadium between all the wooden support beams, all the while trying to catch the snitch. The two bump into each other viciously, and that's where Malfoy eventually slips up, and then falls off his broom, out of the game. Harry, meanwhile, then gets hit in the arm by the bludger in the film, breaking it, and is forced to grab the snitch with his other hand, which he manages to do, ending the match with a Gryffindor victory. So yeah, the movie managed to be the longer version, which is like the only time it has the advantage of length over the book. With that being said, however, Harry's arm is flat out broken in both versions. He faints briefly in the book before waking up with Lockhart in his face staring down at him. In both versions, Lockhart tries to fix Harry's arm, only to completely screw it up by doing a spell the movie calls Brachium Amendo, which completely erased the bones in his arm. So now instead of broken bones, he's got 0 bones now.
Good job.
Yeah, so Lockhart just made everything worse, and Harry has to go see Madame Pomfrey in the hospital wing. And basically we cut straight there right afterwards, in which Madame Pomfrey openly announces how growing back his bones is possible, but it will be extremely painful. Ron in the book actually tries to use this to show Hermione Lockhart's incompetence, but Hermione still sticks up for him. So with that being said, Harry is forced to drink something called Skelligro, which in both versions he spits out immediately. The book describing how it burned in his mouth and throat, and he's basically forced to stay the night in the hospital wing while his bones regrow. So yeah, the book has the Gryffindor team show up with Oliver Wood congratulating Harry, but Madame Pomfrey brushes them all off because Harry needs rest. That's where we cut to the next scene, where after several hours of agonizing pain later, Harry wakes up in the hospital wing at night. The movie in particular has some of the lizard voices speaking to him in his sleep before he wakes up, but upon waking up, he meets Dobby yet again. In both versions, he reveals that he was the one who closed the barrier to the Hogwarts Express, and even shows how he had to, quote, iron his hands, showing his bandaged fingers. He also reveals that the mad bludger was his doing, and amongst all this, he starts crying into the pillowcase he wears. Harry asks him why he wears that, to which Dobby responds that it's a mark of his enslavement. The only way he can be set free is to be provided with actual clothes. If he was presented with some clothes, he would be free. He also elaborates, stating that he who must not be named treated elves like vermin during his dark reign, and upon his demise, life for the elves radically improved. Except for Dobby, of course. He's still treated like absolute shit. Then he reveals that the Chamber of Secrets does indeed exist, and that history is about to repeat itself. Harry asks for more information, but Dobby realizes he revealed too much already, and starts whacking himself again as punishment. He proceeds to magically disappear when footsteps are heard, and Harry overhears Dumbledore, along with Professor McGonagall, arrive with a new petrified victim, Colin Creevey. The book explains that he was probably trying to sneak out of the common room to see Harry in the hospital wing. Well, shock and horror, he failed, because he was petrified by an unknown attacker and frozen solid. Dumbledore and McGonagall do actually try searching through his camera to see if he got a lucky picture of his attacker, but it doesn't work, because Michael Bay helps sabotage the camera and it puffs out in smoke. So the chapter closes with Harry overhearing Dumbledore bluntly state that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Again. And that's one hell of a mystery. So my thoughts. This was also a pretty packed chapter. The Polyjuice Potion, the Quidditch game, and the most annoying fanboy character being petrified. I like how the story is progressing between more and more disaster. Nobody cared about Mrs. Norris being petrified except Filch and Ginny. Colin Creevey is a character I care slightly more for, but not that much more, since he was really annoying. In case you don't catch the memo, it's only going to get worse. Much worse. I did kind of enjoy the Quidditch sequence in the movie over the book. However, I think that everything else that is in both mutual versions are on equal footing with each other. And anything the book has that the movie doesn't is an easy advantage the book has. Although they kept in the important stuff. So the adaptation is still on the right track. I don't have much more to say, aside from the pacing still being efficient. And next we cut to chapter 11, titled The Dueling Club. And when I heard that, I knew we were in for another iconic scene. So basically, in the book, Harry is allowed out of the hospital wing, noticing that all the curtains on Colin Creevey have been closed. Harry meets Ron and Hermione in the bathroom where Moaning Myrtle hangs out. Now in the movie, this is actually the first time they go into the bathroom. And to catch us up to speed, Ron asks why the hell they're in the girls' bathroom on the first floor, to which Hermione responds that nobody comes in here, because of one Moaning Myrtle. And this is where Moaning Myrtle gets her film debut, as she appears behind Ron and starts openly self-loathing herself again. She's played by Shirley Henderson, who was 37 when this movie was released.
What?
Yeah, I'm not making that up. She's playing an unaging ghost character who died at the school as a student, and they didn't actually get a girl to play her. Rather, they got someone who was in their mid-30s. Now that is some bizarre trivia if I've ever seen it. Now it's not the actress's fault that she was born in the 1960s, but it gets really creepy later on, now that you're aware that the actress was too bloody old. Also, to make your head explode if it hasn't already, she was the one who voiced Babu Frick in The Rise of Skywalker.
I am not shitting you.
I just learnt that while going through her filmography on Wikipedia. To describe her performance here, I can kinda understand why they chose her for the role. I guess her true age was a little ambiguous on screen, and she is very much how one reading the book would imagine the character. A girl with self-esteem issues to the extreme, and the most obnoxious scream toppled with a creepy but sorrow voice at the same time. It does kind of give a memorable character. However, due to her nature, she ain't exactly going to be a fan favorite of anyone. So in the book, the parallel version of this scene also includes the trio speculating on how the monster from the Chamber of Secrets attacks its victims. Maybe it's invisible, maybe it transforms into something indistinguishable, and so on. So then the book discusses how Colin Creevey's petrification became school news all over, despite it being implied that the hospital wing tried to hide it. So mass hysteria ensues. First year students walk in tight groups, and Ginny, who was of course a fellow student of Colin, both being first years, was distraught. And Fred and George don't help by jump scaring her, with an angry Percy threatening to write to their mother if they don't stop. Although I don't think that's going to stop Fred and George. Of course not. Neville buys some allegedly protective devices out of fear, and he doesn't calm down even when reminded that he's a pureblood. But his counter argument is that he's pretty much bordering on the line between a magic and squib person. And yeah, I can see why. I asked him once if he could try cleaning the stain on my mystery potion, and he tried flicking his wand for 5 minutes trying to help me, before I excused myself, went straight past Ron, and asked some other student to do it. I think it was one of the Hufflepuff students. Anyways, by the time the second week of December rolls around, the trio decide to stay at Hogwarts in order to complete the potion, and the fact that Malfoy has suspiciously decided to stay. Hermione states that she'll steal from Snape's private storage directly, while Ron and Harry distract him during class. So during the potions class, Snape is having the Gryffindor and Slytherin students work in the same mutual class, and being the biased teacher he is, he rips on every single teeny tiny mistake the Gryffindors make, especially when Neville does it. Hermione does a subtle nod to Harry, in which after Snape looks away, Harry throws some of Fred's fireworks out of his pocket, ignites it with his wand, and then throws it into Goyle's cauldron, and it goes full Michael Bay. Anyone nearby starts to swell, mostly the Slytherins as the book indicates, and Hermione slips in and out, grabbing what she needs. After the chaos is quelled, Snape swears that he will get whoever did it expelled, while staring at Harry intensely. And yeah, It's really intense on Stephen Fry's part. An agonizing 10 minutes later, the bell rings, and everyone can go. So now they've got the ingredients. Then a week later, there's a notice board being held up for a dueling club being held in the evening at 8 p.m. And so we finally return to the movie with the scene of the Great Hall with all the dining tables removed and a large stage has appeared in the middle of the vast room. Everyone gathers round, and upon speculating who's hosting the dueling club, the initial thought that it's going to be Flitwick because he was an expert dueling champion in his youth. It turns out to be Gilderoy Lockhart. No! Oh, go to hell. Not this guy again. And yeah, the book is good at getting you to feel how it wants you to feel. And on top of that, he brought Snape along with him. No! Okay, this is just a recipe for disaster. Lockhart, in his cocky arrogance, announces that Dumbledore gave him permission to start a dueling club in light of recent events. And they even throw in a brief shot where he throws his cape to a flock of girls who gleefully catch it. The dialogue here is around 90% similar, I'd say. Very accurately transcripted from the book. As I stated before, Lockhart and Snape are hosting the dueling club. In both versions, Lockhart assures everyone that nobody should worry about losing their potions teacher once they're done, as if anyone actually likes Snape. The book even throws in Ron muttering to Harry that he hopes that they both wipe each other out. And for the demonstration, the two march up to each other, bow their heads, and then walk back for the duel. Then Snape of course gets the first strike by yelling out an offensive spell, causing Lockhart to go flying back. This has reactions from the Slytherins cheering, and Hermione in particular being all giddy over whether Lockhart's alright. And Harry and Ron ask her in return,
"Oh my god, who the hell cares?"
Yeah, so as Lockhart gets up, he tries to excuse the fact that he was too slow as a matter of knowing what Snape was going for and wanting to show the class what the spell is like as a demonstration. Yeah, this guy's not going to admit that he was caught completely off guard. The contrast between Lockhart and Snape is really obvious. The characters are easy to pick out and differentiate. I should also talk about this now, but Rowling was really good with character names and how they sound, even if there isn't a super obvious meaning. Severus Snape sounds like a villain's name, and Gilderoy Lockhart sounds like a ladies' man. The names are very memorable and very iconic. I suppose compared to other stories, I will remember the names better than I will something like Rogue One, because those characters had really boring names, just like the film they were in. I think people may underestimate what a character's name can give off impression-wise. So now we get a minor deviation from book to film. In the book, Lockhart then immediately sorts everyone in the room into pairs of two, so they can prepare to duel each other. Neville is paired with Justin Fletchley from earlier, Ron is paired with Seamus Finnegan, Hermione is paired with a big-ass Slytherin girl, and Harry, as you might have predicted, is paired with Draco Malfoy. In both versions, it's Snape that suggests this, clearly expecting Harry to have his ass handed to him. Now, the general pairing was cut from the movie, and to make a long story short, it's all a mess. Harry and Malfoy strike each other 3 times between the both of them. There's some spells we don't get to see, like the intense laughter and forced tap dancing spell, and basically, Lockhart has to call everyone off, and proposes that perhaps maybe they should do things one at a time. And that's where we return to the movie, which cuts straight to this. Now in the movie, they do a bunch of offensive spells to launch each other back, with Malfoy landing in front of Snape, who aggressively picks him up and throws him back into the duel. Then there's that iconic line,
"Scared, Potter? You wish."
In the book, Malfoy immediately just launches a snake out of his wand, which the movie also shows eventually after a bunch of spells cast towards the other. In both versions, Lockhart tries to get rid of the snake with his wand, but only ends up angering it after it's launched in the air. Then it proceeds to approach Justin, who in the movie pretty much only has a minor cameo. And then Harry does something that from our perspective doesn't surprise us, but it shocks everyone. He starts talking to the snake, trying to get it to back off. The eerie music while Harry speaks to the snake, just like a snake, is really effective. That's actually a small point to the movie for the brilliant score. Anyways, in both versions, he turns to Justin, who gives the opposite reaction of what he expected. Justin is both angry and scared, yelling at Harry, asking him what he's playing at, before storming off. Also between the mutual versions is Snape getting rid of the snake with his wand, in which it disappears quickly. In the book, Justin's outburst happens before the snake is vaporized, while in the movie it's vice versa. But it doesn't really matter. The point gets across, and this leads to Harry becoming infamous across the school. Snape in the book gives him a strange look, and he hears every other student muttering stuff to each other. That's where Ron approaches him and nudges him towards the Gryffindor common room. The movie cuts straight to when they enter the common room, and in both versions is pretty much the same, down to the dialogue, minus the fact that certain lines are said by book Hermione and movie Ron, and vice versa. You know what I mean. The information conveyed is the same. Harry is confronted by both Ron and Hermione about the fact that he's a parseltongue, meaning that he can talk to snakes. After Harry calls back to the time that he spoke to a snake and set him on Dudley, the book adding the mention of the whole Brazil thing which the last movie omitted, he shrugs it off as no big deal, because he's sure that lots of people can do it. But they proceed to tell him that it's an extremely rare gift in the wizarding world, and everything is now bad. And Harry angrily responds that if he hadn't told the snake not to attack Justin, and that's where Ron interrupts him by saying that, "Oh, so that was what you were doing," and explaining how it seemed like he was egging the snake on. Harry is confused by the fact that he spoke a different language without knowing it. Then Hermione responds with the fact that Salazar Slytherin was known for talking to snakes. And that's actually the reason why Slytherin House has a serpent as a mascot. Yeah, so you know what that means. It means that everyone's gonna start thinking that Harry is the direct descendant of Salazar Slytherin. Now that was a very effective Chekhov's gun. Harry talking to a snake was originally presented in such a casual way and directly showed how Harry had magical powers at the time. I guess one wasn't supposed to directly think about how talking to a snake also correlated somewhat with the Sorting Hat considering him for Slytherin, which, oh boy, we'll get to that. The intrigue is pretty well set up. It makes you think about the story more closely. The possibility that Harry might just be descended from Salazar Slytherin, given they shared the same gift. Hermione points out that Salazar lived 1,000 years ago. For all they know, he could be. So the book describes how later that night, Harry thinks hard about his possible connection to Salazar Slytherin. The fact is that he knew squat about his father's family. After failing to speak Parseltongue quietly, he reminds himself that he's in Gryffindor, only for a voice in his head to remind him that the Sorting Hat wanted to put him in Slytherin. You bastard, novel. Of course that's a strong possibility. As such, the next day, as the snow turns into a blizzard, he tries explaining to his classmates in herbology that he was just trying to talk off the snake without success. Hermione eventually suggests he go find Justin and explain to him everything about what happened. He eventually finds a group of Hufflepuffs in the middle of the library whispering to each other, and Harry eavesdrops on their conversation, in which they start talking about how Justin's keeping a low profile for now, especially after he slipped information to Harry that he was a Muggle-born. They all think Harry is the heir of Slytherin, with the group's leader, more or less, Ernest Macmillan, piecing together that Harry had a run-in with Filch earlier, and on top of that, Colin Creevey was annoying him, which was why they were likely targeted. And when a girl in the group points out that Harry defeated He Who Must Not Be Named, Ernest simply responds that it must have been because the Dark Lord was trying to get rid of competition. And Harry was just another runner-up for Dark Lord, even if he was an infant. Harry, of course, can't take this slander anymore, and so he reveals himself.
Surprise, motherfucker.
All the Hufflepuffs jump at the sight of him, and Ernest stubbornly refuses to give any explanation Harry gives, much to his annoyance. That's also where Ernie proceeds to tell Potter that he's a pure-blood wizard, and his family can be traced back as far as 9 generations. So don't get any ideas. Harry protests on why he'd want to attack Muggle-borns, to which Ernie counters that he's heard that he hates his Muggle family, to which Harry points out that anyone who lives with the Dursleys would get fucking sick of them, and daring Ernie hypothetically to try it for himself. Harry then turns and walks off furious. After going a random direction, he bumps into Hagrid, who's carrying a dead rooster, but Harry doesn't tell him what he heard the Hufflepuffs say about him, and so he storms off. Now, as you might know, the movie omits all of this. Instead, after the scene of Harry being told that he may be descended from Salazar Slytherin, it cuts to him in the middle of one of the classes. He looks around to see everyone look away, including Ginny. He goes to excuse himself, intending to go back to the common room, and this right here is the movie's alternate setup for what happens next. Right after Harry hears more snake voices, Harry stumbles into the worst sight imaginable. Justin, petrified just like Colin and Mrs. Norris before him, and on top of that, nearly headless Nick has been frozen solid too, practically revealing that you can petrify ghosts as well. Anyways, what happens when Harry panics actually differs depending on the version. In the book, it's Peeves the poltergeist who spots him at the crime scene, and so he very loudly yells about Harry attacking the frozen pair, resulting in the doors opening and everyone coming in, looking straight at Harry.
Wow, what an asshole.
In the movie, however, it's Filch who catches Harry at the crime scene and assures him he's in trouble now, but either way, Professor McGonagall comes in and speaks to Harry, while other teachers proceed to move the frozen pair elsewhere. Peeves in the book starts openly singing about Harry's dark deeds before McGonagall tells him to fuck off. Ernie Macmillan is ordered to use a fan to move nearly headless Nick, while Justin goes to the hospital wing. So in both versions, Harry swears he didn't do anything, only for McGonagall to respond that this is out of her hands. Harry is escorted to a statue of a gargoyle, in which the password is Sherbet Lemon, a callback to the sweet Dumbledore was fond of in the prologue to the whole series. Point is, Harry is left to go up the stairs on his own in the movie, while McGonagall accompanies him in the book and speak to Professor Dumbledore, since this is obviously his office. And that's the end of chapter 11. So that's a lot to unpack. As you might have guessed, the movie left a ton of stuff out. As stated before, Justin was relegated to a minor character, and they cut the part where he spoke to Harry, and the slipping of the fact that he was a muggle. In fact, one might actually forget about Justin in the movie, and just assume that the frozen Hufflepuff in the later scene was just some random kid. I sure the hell did when I first saw this movie, because movie Justin is barely in the movie, so his petrification doesn't mean as much. Same as nearly headless Nick, although one would still remember him, but they cut the whole Death Day party, so it's not as effective as it could be. I wonder if they could have slipped in a scene introducing Justin. And now that I think about it, when I said earlier that they should have just trimmed the whole flying car alongside the Hogwarts Express scene, maybe this is something that there could be room for. They had enough time for Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey, so why not Justin? You also might remember that we're really starved for characters that don't belong to Gryffindor or Slytherin, because the other two houses are quite underrepresented in the early series. In fact, it takes until the Goblet of Fire for us to start getting some external representation, and that's in both the book and the movie. So to sum it up, I like this chapter. Well-paced, effective mystery, and ambiguous ending for the chapter. Right after Harry is seemingly being framed for all the attacks on all the Muggleborns. As a Muggleborn myself, my strategy is to stay far the fuck away from Harry. Whenever I see him, I go in the opposite direction, because even if he isn't the heir of Slytherin, he clearly attracts trouble. Of course, Filoni started mocking me for my safety precautions, and I taunted him back by pointing out that he's the reason Slytherin's got 0 points. He then punched me in the face and docked Slytherin another 30 points. But since they don't have any points, it's pointless. Anyways, let's move on to chapter 12, titled The Polyjuice Potion, which you know right off the bat what this will mainly be about. But first, the Dumbledore's office stuff. In the book, this is where McGonagall leaves him in the main area, while in the movie, she already parted ways with Harry. The book describes out of all the offices he's been in, Dumbledore was by far the most interesting. In both versions, it's a circular room full of stuff like self-playing instruments, portraits of old people, specifically the previous headmasters who are all snoozing. He also comes across the sorting hat, and this is a moment that's adapted in both versions with one key deviation. In the book, Harry speaks to the hat by putting it on his head, while in the movie he just speaks to it casually from a short distance away. Either way, the dialogue is transcripted accurately, with Harry asking the Sorting Hat about whether it made the right choice, to which the Hat affirms that it did indeed make the right choice, but does point out that Harry would have done well in Slytherin, and the reaction to this in both versions is actually different. Book Harry takes off the hat immediately and puts it back, clearly still stressed, while blurting out that it's wrong, while movie Harry defiantly tells the hat that it's wrong. Stressed versus brave is the main difference in this teeny tiny deviation. Then Harry turns to see a hideous bird nearby, withering pretty much, and then out of nowhere, it burns and ceases to exist.
And it's gone.
Dumbledore then comes in and explains that the bird's name Fawkes is a phoenix, and the self-burning is normal, because then it gets reborn as a baby bird. Dumbledore explains to a confused Harry that phoenixes have healing powers and make faithful pets, the former being an important detail for later. In both versions still, Hagrid comes in, pleading that it wasn't Harry, and he causes quite a ruckus, saying that he'd swear it to the Ministry of Magic. Of course, the main difference here is that film Harry didn't encounter Hagrid shortly before he stumbled into the crime scene, so in the context of the movie only, he's just sticking up for Harry. I think they probably should have had Harry bump into Hagrid moments before Harry stumbled into the crime scene, because then this scene would make a lot more sense, and be better adapted from the book. Like, don't tell me they couldn't afford a simple hello greeting, right? However, when Dumbledore tells Hagrid that he's sure that Harry is not the attacker, Hagrid excuses himself outside, and Dumbledore then asks Harry in private that he doesn't think he's the attacker, but asks him if he has anything important to tell him. The book goes through Harry's thoughts, from Malfoy's threat, to the Polyjuice potion, to the crap people said about him, and even the fact that he's been hearing voices. But in both versions, Harry does not wish to say anything, and Dumbledore lets him off. So moving on to the next part of the story, the book describes how the attack on Nearly Headless Nick specifically, a literal ghost, made everyone terrified, and most students immediately went off for the Hogwarts Express for the holidays. Malfoy is of course staying, along with his two sidekicks Crabbe and Goyle, because as the book describes it, those two nut jobs do whatever Malfoy does. They really are portrayed as backup for Malfoy in any of his confrontations with Harry. I also want to note how the two literally don't have any dialogue whatsoever in the first two books. So anyways, Harry is relieved that most people are leaving for Christmas because the muttering and pointing behind his back intensified after the attack on both Justin and Nick. Also, Fred and George, like true jackasses, whenever they encounter Harry, jokingly refer to him as the heir of Slytherin, and how everyone else better move out of the way. Then of course Percy, as a more serious character, disapproves. Ginny is also not receptive to this behaviour. Malfoy, on the other hand, is described as having a sour look whenever Fred and George are on it. Ron heavily speculates that it's him being disappointed that he's not getting all the credit, and Hermione announces that the Polyjuice potion is nearly ready. So basically all the characters I mentioned before all stay at Hogwarts, with all the Weasleys deciding to not visit their brother Bill in Egypt. So anyways, on Christmas morning, Hermione wakes up Harry and Ron by throwing them presents and announcing the potion is ready. Oh, and if you're wondering what present the Dursleys sent Harry this year, it's a toothpick.
You serious?
The rest of his presents are far better. Hagrid gives him some fudge, Ron gives him a book, and Hermione gets him a quill from the feather of an eagle. He also gets another sweater from Mrs. Weasley. Anyways, cut to the Great Hall, which is where the movie returns to us. Right after a brief shot demonstrating wintertime, in the book, Dumbledore shares some of his favourite Christmas carols for the main three, and something else of note is how Fred and George bewitched Percy's prefect badge with the title of Pinhead.
Who you calling Pinhead?
Malfoy also mocks the sweater Harry and the Weasleys got, although Harry does have some smug satisfaction that he will potentially bust Malfoy and get him expelled. In the movie, they get straight down to business. This is where Hermione tells the pair the potion is complete, and in both mutual versions, states that they still need a little bit of who they're changing into. And on top of that, assurance that their targets Crabbe and Goyle can't burst in on them, so they've got to be incapacitated while they interrogate Malfoy. The dialogue is pretty much similar during the explanation between both versions, and then Hermione pulls out 2 chocolate cakes, cauldron cakes to be more specific. She explains that she filled them with a sleeping draft, and all Harry and Ron need to do is make sure Crabbe and Goyle eat them. Once their lust for food gets the better of them, pull out some of their hairs and dump them in a storage cupboard. Hermione states that she's already got the hair of the Slytherin girl back at the dueling club. So point is, Harry and Ron hide in a deserted hallway near the Great Hall, waiting for Crabbe and Goyle to come by. The book adding that they stuffed themselves to awe hell with mountains of food. Then of course they enter the hall. A small change is how in the movie, Harry relied on the Wingardium Leviosa spell to get the cakes up in the air, while in the book he just placed them without any magic. Unironically, this makes movie Crabbe and Goyle even stupider, because just like what the movie shows, the book describes how Crabbe and Goyle spot the cakes and without any hesitation, grab them and stuff them down. I also like how the movie shows them carrying a junk load of food just because. Especially in the movie, they don't even question why there are cakes floating around in the hallway near the Great Hall. Anyways, upon grabbing the cakes, they both scoff them down and proceed to faint. And it's as comical as the book describes. If not more, since we can actually see it this time instead of reading it. Or listening in my case. Now, since this is technically Crabbe and Goyle's biggest contribution in the first 2 movies combined, I think we should talk about the actors who portray them. Vincent Crabbe is played by Jamie Waylett, and Gregory Goyle is played by Josh Herdman. The former has a more interesting story in relation to the tale of his casting. He was actually in line to play Dudley Dursley, but Chris Columbus believed he would pass off more as Crabbe during his audition as the story goes. He then of course went in to appear in all of the Harry Potter movies, minus the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. Then the same year Part 2 came out, he participated in the August 2011 London riots, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his involvement. Josh Herdman, on the other hand, aside from being a minorly successful actor, is a mixed martial artist, which was interesting for me to learn about. It seems all the kid actors from Harry Potter have their own interesting stories to tell during and post the production of all the films. Now that I've spoken about Crabbe and Goyle's actors, let's get on with the story. Ron has that line about how thick Crabbe and Goyle are in both versions. Although in the book, it's before the idiots eat the cake, and in the movie it's after. So after the 2 dolts are stuffed away in a cupboard, in which you can assume the same happened off screen in the movie, we then cut to the trio in the first floor girls' bathroom. Having retrieved their Slytherin robes, and by extension shoes, and they're all about to drink the potion, Hermione warns that they've only got an hour, so they need to use their time wisely. Exclusive to the book is the detail that the potion, as soon as the hairs are dropped in, come in the most disgusting colours. Hermione's is piss yellow, Ron's is booger green, and Harry's worst of all is shit brown. Anyways, they all do their cheers and drink their potions each. It is a bit different where in the book they all go into the cubicles, while in the movie they only go into the cubicles after they've consumed the potion and they feel like they're gonna be sick. The potion is described as tasting like overcooked cabbage in the book, so not as gross as it could be, but still unappetizing. Harry then, alongside Ron and Hermione, painfully transform into the people they were trying to disguise themselves as. In the movie, the special effects aren't actually half bad. It's a major step up from the crappy CGI of the first film that looks like the Polar Express and being uncanny as shit. So yeah, Harry transforms into Goyle, and to be honest, I'm gonna have to give the book the point for what follows, because the movie has a bunch of stupid, pointless changes. So yeah, Harry, now resembling Goyle, feels completely different being a taller, larger boy. One of the weirdest changes from book to movie is how in the book, Harry has briefly inherited Goyle's vocal cords, and now sounds exactly like him, as does Ron. But if you've seen the movie, you might remember that the pair of them still sound like themselves, and they're forced to imitate Crabbe and Goyle's voices, instead of just getting them easily along with the physical transformation. It's really stupid, and I don't know why this was done, but as you'll soon see, things are about to get a lot stupider for the movie side of things. Now, the audiobook and the performance from Stephen Fry doing Crabbe and Goyle's voices was pretty compelling, and funny might I add. I guess the one thing they do adapt faithfully is the fact that the sequence is supposed to be humorous, and not to be taken entirely seriously. Crabbe and Goyle in the audiobook are both gruff, and actually learning this is what the pair sound like is a nice reveal since again, they had no dialogue in the first 2 books. But they take that away with the filmmakers dubbing Crabbe and Goyle over with Ron and Harry, which is not only pointless, but a waste of time. I mean, thinking about it, the Harry Potter movies were on a stricter deadline given the near yearly releases of the movies. And you'd think they'd just have Waylett and Herdman play Ron and Harry in disguise for a change. But someone decided to dub their lines over with Grint and Radcliffe. If you think about it, stuff like that just makes the editing process longer, because they forced themselves to have Rupert Grint and Daniel Radcliffe dub over Waylett and Herdman's performances at the same pace and tone as the pair did. And it brings into question, why not just trust Waylett and Herman to carry the scene all by themselves, especially since it would have been closer to the book, and it would have taken up the same amount of time, because dubbing their voices does nothing to shorten the runtime. And it's stupid because it makes it seem like the Polyjuice potion is really useless because you can't talk extensively without being found out. Not to mention this creates a plot hole come the Goblet of Fire movie. So yeah, my criticism is that this is a completely useless and pointless change that actually made the story and its presentation worse. Anyways, ignoring that, the pair then knock on Hermione to come out. But in both versions, she refuses to come out and tells the pair to go on without her. The book indicating something off given her high-pitched voice. So Harry and Ron, noticing that they're wasting time if Hermione's not going to come out, go outside, trying to find the Slytherin common room. The pair do tell each other to move and act more like their disguised counterparts. Then the book describes how the pair are struggling to find their way to the Slytherin common room, especially since a Ravenclaw prefect doesn't give them directions at all. They just have to take a shitty guess, based on where the Slytherins emerge every day. The movie, however, cuts straight to the scene where they encounter Percy, Ron's brother. Now, in both mutual versions, the pair do struggle to perfectly imitate their disguise identities. Ron does forget for a brief second that Percy doesn't realize he's Ron, and instead refers to him as Crabbe. Percy, of course, tells the pair, thinking that they're Slytherin boys, that he is a school prefect, so he gets the excuse to go patrolling the school in the afternoon, while the pair of them do not. Then in both versions, perhaps the only time Harry is pleased to see him, Malfoy shows up and tells Harry and Ron in disguise that he was looking for the pair of them. Exclusive to the movie is Malfoy noticing Harry still having his glasses on, and asking why he's got them on, and Harry quickly improvises and says he was reading, with Malfoy responding that he seriously didn't know he could read, which kinda shows that Malfoy doesn't really think much of his so-called friends. Of course, in the book, Harry had already taken off the glasses due to the fact that they steamed up, and the fact that Goyle didn't need glasses since he now had Goyle's anatomy. To further demonstrate Tom Felton's impressive performance as Draco Malfoy, where you can easily say he's one of the best kid actors, he addresses Percy in such a snarky way, referring to him as Weasley like an insult, and when Percy tells him to mind his tongue, we get this subtle blink and you miss it moment where Malfoy lifts his eyebrows open for a minute, sneering at him before walking off, with Ron and Harry following him, still pretending to be his friends. I also like how Felton swiftly walks off camera right here. Anyways, in the book, the pair follow Malfoy, who starts talking about the heir of Slytherin, which makes the disguised pair excited. Malfoy leads them to the Slytherin common room, with the portrait password being pure blood, and that seems to make the Slytherins even more stuck up than before. Something this book implies, but doesn't outright say, is the implication that no Muggle-born student makes it into Slytherin via the Sorting Hat, And that actually makes a lot of sense. Given the Sorting Hat was enchanted by all the Hogwarts founders combined, and Salazar Slytherin probably put in a provision that ensured that no Muggleborns were able to get into his house, with or without him there. So instead, only purebloods and half-bloods have a chance of making it into Slytherin. As far as I can tell, the characters in Slytherin had at least one wizarding parent, which further gives off the vibe that Slytherin is the bad house, because they all set such bad examples in the actual written stories at least. Anyways, aside from that, the conversation between Malfoy and the disguised Harry and Ron is adapted in the movie. Something the book exclusively has is Malfoy showing the pair a newspaper cutting delivered by his father Lucius that shows that Arthur Weasley was fined heavily for bewitching a Muggle car, and the pair of them are forced to fake laugh at this. Anyways, in both versions, Malfoy goes on and rants about the Weasleys, and being the bigot that he is, insults them for liking Muggles. In both versions, Malfoy does see something is off with who he thinks is his friends in front of him. Ron has to lie that he's got a stomach ache, and Malfoy goes on after this about how the Daily Prophet hasn't reported the attacks yet, and that Dumbledore is trying to cover it up. And in the movie, after Malfoy says that Dumbledore's the worst thing about Hogwarts, Harry stupidly blurts out that he's wrong, and he has to improvise again by stating that he thinks Harry Potter is worse. In the book, he proceeds to mock and imitate Colin Creevey. Then finally, he talks about how people are stupid for thinking the heir of Slytherin is actually Harry Potter. The disguised pair wait in anticipation, but then Malfoy reveals that he's not the one behind the attacks, because he remarks that he wishes that he knew who it was. But something that does come up is how Malfoy's father Lucius told him that the chamber was open 50 years ago, before even he was at school, and last time, a Muggle-born student died. So he reckons it's only a matter of time before one of them is killed this time. All before hoping that it's unironically Hermione Granger. In both versions, they even keep in the detail of Ron angrily clenching his fist in anger, and Harry has to give him a look to not attack Malfoy. So when asked if the perpetrator was caught 50 years ago, Malfoy says yeah, they were expelled. And they're probably in Azkaban right now. And this is actually Harry's first time hearing about it, and thereby the audience's, at least from the book series perspective. Exclusive to the book is Malfoy also revealing that the Ministry of Magic raided the Malfoy home, but didn't find anything, and mentions how his dad has a lot of dark arts stuff. But then of course in both versions, the interview is all but over. Ron's hair starts to grow red again, and Harry's scar returns. And so as soon as they can, they bolt from the common room. And then they pass by the cupboard in which they locked the real Crabbe and Goyle, leaving their shoes behind for them. Although this is only shown in the book, and then they go to the first floor girls' bathroom. So in both versions, they come waltzing in, exclaiming that they've got a lot to tell Hermione. And Hermione still tells them to go away, the book maintaining the high-pitched voice. Moaning Myrtle then phases through the cubicle, and happier than ever, she tells the pair that what happened to Hermione is quite horrible before she flies off. Anyways, the cubicle is opened, and honestly the first time, you don't know what to expect. But in the movie specifically, Hermione turns around and...
Oh my goodness!
She is completely transformed into a humanoid cat. Yeah, it turns out that Slytherin girl must have a cat, and the potion isn't supposed to work for animal transformation. So the pair have to convince her to go straight to the hospital wing, since Madame Pomfrey never asked too many questions, and after a while of attempted persuasion, they do so. This is referenced in the movie come the next scene, but of course we see it firsthand in the book, and that's the end of chapter 12. So yeah, as established, the movie version was inferior because of some dumb changes. The only reasonable mistake I think Harry made was not taking off his glasses and then having to make the excuse that he was reading. The thing is that the dubbing was completely pointless and a waste of effort, and it wasn't faithful to the book. And who the hell knows what the reason for the change actually was? It's a stain on the movie's writing, and it's a rare time I was taken out of the story. While the scene has a clear sense of humor in the book, book, it wasn't overly stupid like the movie was. However, the information concerning the revelation of the Chamber of Secrets having been opened 50 years ago is a huge revelation. Via the timeline, we can assume the Chamber of Secrets was opened in 1943, June 1943, as my research stated. Out of curiosity, I checked to see what the Muggles in this case were doing around that time. According to Wikipedia, the most notable thing that happened that month was the Germans successfully testing the V2 ballistic missile. But there wasn't exactly anything that directly correlated to the Wizarding World. Well, actually, that might not be entirely true, because we were in the middle of World War II, and the United Kingdom in particular was right in the middle of the conflict, being part of the big three allied powers. Or big four if you include China. And I'm sure the Wizarding World was affected in a lot of ways. Anyways, after this is where things get extremely interesting. Chapter 13 is titled The Very Secret Diary. The book explains how Hermione actually stayed in the hospital wing for several weeks. Initially, everyone thought she'd been attacked when everyone returned from the holidays. Hermione is brought all the homework by Harry and Ron. And slowly, the furry features start to disappear from her face and her eyes start turning brown again. However, Ron spots a letter from under Hermione's pillow. He grabs it and reads the letter out loud. It's a shitty get well soon letter from fucking Gilderoy Lockhart. Ugh. Ron is disgusted with the fact that Hermione has been sleeping with the letter in question. So after this, we return to the movie, with Harry and Ron referencing how Hermione is nearly recovered, and in the book, they notice a commotion upstairs with Filch. In the movie, however, they cut him out, and they notice water flooding in the nearby area, and they notice it comes from the first floor girls' bathroom. So they go inside after hearing moaning Myrtle crying harder than usual. In both versions, Myrtle speaks to Harry and Ron weepily, asking whether or not they've come to throw something else at her. Harry or Ron, depending on the version, optly point out that Myrtle's a ghost anyways, and that makes her even more upset. The dialogue is again very accurate from the book, and Myrtle, when asked, reveals that she doesn't actually know who threw an object at her, since she was busy moping in the opposite direction. So after she continues sobbing in a cubicle, the pair notice the thing that was thrown at Myrtle. It's a book, and in both versions, it's a sizably small book with a black cover soaked in water. Ron in the book only does warn Harry against picking it up willy-nilly, since it might be bewitched. But Harry accepts the risk, and peers at it. Upon closer inspection, it's a diary, looking like it dates back around 50 years visibly. And the name on the diary is one Tom M. Riddle, exactly as written. What the M is, who the hell knows at this point? We actually get a callback to the detention part, because Ron remembers polishing a shield made for one Tom Riddle while under the watch of Filch. It's actually the one he burped slugs all over, and so he had to clean it again. Although the diary is empty, save for some information showing an address. That indicates that whoever Tom Riddle was, he was Muggle-born. With that being said, however, Harry pockets the diary. So at the start of February, Hermione completely recovers, and she's caught up to speed on the mysterious diary, although none of them can figure out how to get it to do anything. Ron even guesses, half as a joke, that maybe Tom Riddle's award was because he killed Moaning Myrtle in the first place. Although Hermione's theory is that Riddle caught the heir of Slytherin 50 years ago, and that's why he got the award. And perhaps the path to the Chamber of Secrets is hidden in Riddle's diary, although Ron points out again that there's nothing written in the diary. So yeah, they're stuck at a dead end for now. The book then goes on to explain how Harry, against his better judgment, kept the diary around instead of just chucking it out the castle window. He openly thinks to himself, right until nightfall, how to unlock the secret of the diary. There's something about the name Tom M. Riddle that sounds familiar to him. The book explaining that it's almost like a long-lost friend, except he never had friends before Hogwarts. The trio also go to the trophy room to look for clues. Tom Riddle's award was hidden away amongst a bunch of other crap, and they managed to find out that he was a school prefect in his day, seemingly almost like Percy. The book also describes the atmosphere around the school. There were no more attacks after Justin and nearly headless Nick, and everyone's starting to calm down. minus Ernie Macmillan, who still thinks Harry is the guilty one, and maybe Peeves, who spends his time singing about Harry attacking the Muggleborns. Then we've got Gilderoy Lockhart acting like he stopped the heir of Slytherin in his general air of cocky arrogance. Now, one of the biggest scenes cut from the book is what happens around February 14th, otherwise known as Valentine's Day. Arranged by Lockhart, who mentions that around 46 people have sent him cards. He has a bunch of dwarves come in and explains that they'll be sending people's valentines to whoever they want. Hearing that, you might be thinking,
this is where the fun begins.
But you'd be wrong. This is where the cringe begins. Throughout the day, dwarves deliver valentines to whoever, much to the annoyance of the teachers, and then in the afternoon, a particularly grim-looking dwarf approaches Harry. And Harry, before he can even think to flee, not feeling like a Valentine, and being surrounded by a bunch of first years, including Ginny, the dwarf catches up to him and proceeds to grab Harry, and it results in his bag being ripped open with all his crap falling out. The dwarf pretty much pins him as Malfoy shows up and starts singing the Valentine, and it is sung as follows. His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord. Oh, that was terrible. That was such a rubbish poem. I don't know what to say. Except that I almost died of cringe hearing that. Stephen Fry's impression of the dwarf singing the poem, if you could call it that, was effective for max level cringe. It's quite amazing. The poem, I guess, was meant to be intentionally badly written, but still, it feels like an out of touch or illiterate poem. Malfoy then grabs Tom Riddle's diary, and Harry shoots it out of Malfoy's hand with his wand, causing Malfoy to lose grip with Ron catching it. Percy does dock off 5 points from Gryffindor as a prefect, but it was worth it in Harry's eyes. They also end the scene with Malfoy snarkily taunting Ginny that Harry didn't seem like he enjoyed her Valentine, which causes Ginny to run off in embarrassment. And in case you didn't know who actually wrote the Valentine, well, you certainly do now. So on the way to Professor Flitwick's class, Harry notices that despite his ink bottle smashing ink on his other books, Tom Riddle's diary is completely free of stains. Then after all that stuff the movie omitted, that night, Harry investigates the diary closely when no one else is awake. In both versions, he drops some ink onto the page, to which the ink after a second vanishes, almost like sucking itself onto the paper. Harry then writes, "My name is Harry Potter," and there's his key to unlocking the diary. Harry gets a response in ink that he didn't write, with the diary stating, "Hello Harry Potter, my name is Tom Riddle." And here, the musical score is really at its best. The atmosphere, along with the mysterious diary, really soars here, as Harry writes back. So Harry tries to ask Riddle if he knows anything about the Chamber of Secrets, to which Riddle responds that yes, he does. In the movie, it's presented in a way where the scene spikes in intrigue. The book exclusively has Riddle elaborate that he caught the person who opened the chamber, but it was covered up, and the student who died 50 years ago was said to have died in a freak accident. Then, of course, Riddle offers to show Harry the memory of who he caught 50 years ago. In the movie, it's a simple question from Harry of, "Can you tell me?" with the blunt response of, "No, but I can show you." And just like the trip to Diagon Alley, Harry is teleported again, this time by being sucked into the book, with the film showing everything with great intrigue. Now we get the flashback sequence, although of course, it's abridged like everything else in the movie. In the book, we open with Harry being shot into the area that is Dumbledore's office, although it looks a tad different, and an old wizard he doesn't recognize is sitting there. Despite Harry's attempts to speak to him, he doesn't seem to notice. Shortly after realizing that since he's seeing a memory of Tom Riddle, he is completely invisible to those in the memory. There's a knock at the door, and a boy of 16 years old comes in, visibly a prefect with the same badge Percy wears. This boy also has jet black hair, like Harry. The headmaster refers to the boy as Tom Riddle, and Riddle refers to the old wizard as Dippet. It's implied that the school is about to be closed after an attack on a girl, and that Riddle will be sent back to a Muggle orphanage afterwards, although he identifies himself as a half-blood. Muggle father, which mother? Riddle gives a bit of his backstory here. Riddle states that his mother died shortly after birth, but lived long enough to name him Tom, after his father. Riddle clearly doesn't want to go back to the orphanage, and he asks Professor Dippet what would happen if the perpetrator was caught, to which Dippet asks Riddle if he knows something about all this. Riddle replies no, but Harry notices it's the same sort of no he gave Professor Dumbledore earlier in the book. When dismissed, Harry follows Tom out of the room, and this is where we get a scene adapted into the movie. This is where the memory for film Harry starts. Right after Riddle would have spoken to Professor Dippet, Riddle goes to the entrance hall, in which he's spoken to by a much younger Dumbledore. Tom Riddle in the film is played by Christian Coulson, whose most famous role is ironically Tom Riddle and Tom Riddle alone. Now in the movie, they actually show the girl who died, covered by a sheet being carried out of the school, the only thing visible being their hand. Now some of what Dippet said to Riddle is instead given to Dumbledore in the movie, including the school potentially being closed down, and Riddle having to go back to his shitty orphanage, right before Riddle refusing to tell Dumbledore if he knows anything. The book just has a brief one-and-done conversation, and then Riddle, followed by Harry, walks into the dungeon, leading to the very room Harry would have potions class with Snape 50 years later. So disappointingly, Harry doesn't get to see where the Chamber of Secrets is. Now in the book, Riddle waits by a door in the dungeon, waiting patiently. Although the movie cuts straight to Riddle confronting a boy named Rubius, who has a voice that Harry recognizes. By the audiobook performance, doubled up with the description of the boy being large and overgrown, one can piece together that it's a younger Hagrid. Riddle tells Hagrid that the dead girl's parents will be here tomorrow, and the least he can do is kill the thing that killed their daughter. Hagrid begs Riddle not to kill something called Aragog, that he didn't hurt anybody. Riddle tells Hagrid to stand aside, and despite Hagrid's pleading, Riddle forces open the crate next to Hagrid with magic. Although much to Harry's shock in the book, a hairy oversized spider comes out and scuttles away, Riddle failing to kill it. But then Riddle says that he's going to turn Hagrid in, and Harry is launched out of the memory, back into the Gryffindor common room. Exclusive to the book is Ron coming right in afterwards, and Harry reveals that Hagrid opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago, and that's the end of chapter 13. Now that's a lot to take in. The flashback by far is a highlight of the film. The score, and the black and white colour scheme for the memory, with the only thing of colour being Harry, because I guess colour wasn't invented back then. And the implications bring a lot to chew on, because Hagrid being the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets is completely out of place, but it's still their only lead. I also remember a line in the book shortly after stating that Harry, knowing Hagrid, knows that whatever did happen 50 years ago, Hagrid never intended to harm anyone, despite his obsession with dangerous creatures. You might suspect that there's more to the story than this, but with that being said, you'll just have to keep on reading, or watching if you're a film fan only. So the next chapter after that is titled Cornelius Fudge, which is a character's name. And right off the bat, let me say that despite J.K. Rowling's strength for character names, I greatly dislike this one, since it's got the words corn and fudge in it. Cornelius Fudge together sounds like a disgusting recipe for soup. Like, try mixing in sweet corn soup with fudge, smush it together and try it. In fact, maybe I'll try testing such a recipe on Dave Filoni during lunchtime. Haha. But point is, that's one of the weirder names. Anyways, the chapter starts with the whole self-assurance on Harry's part that Hagrid never intended to harm anyone. And Harry in the book gets extremely sick of telling his friends everything he saw. And on top of that, they reach the natural conclusion that Hagrid's obsession with monsters must have led to him opening the Chamber of Secrets, letting the monster out, and it killed a student, leading to him getting expelled. It was known prior to this point that a 13-year-old Hagrid was expelled in his third year for a reason he'd never talk about. I didn't realize that Hagrid was 63, because he looks at least 15 years younger or something. And yeah, Robbie Coltrane was 50 when the first movie was made. He was younger than his character. In the book and the movie, Hermione suggests going and talking to Hagrid directly about it, although Ron openly states that it would make for a shitty visit, asking Hagrid about whether or not he let a spider loose in the castle, In the movie, they're talking about all this in the courtyard, and Hagrid pops up behind them, and they have to lie about what they were talking about. I guess one purpose of Hagrid's film-only appearance in this instance is to inform us on the progress of the mandrakes without using a narrator. Anyways, the book describes how the vibe around Hogwarts has completely calmed down, it being 4 months since the attack on Justin and nearly headless Nick, and Peeves in particular got bored of his anti-Harry Potter song.
Good!
And basically everyone's got the vibe that the attacker is fully retired. Ernie Macmillan also doesn't treat Harry with suspicion anymore. And just as stated by Hagrid, the mandrakes are on their way to being ready. On top of that, nearly transitioning to the 3rd year, it's time for the trio and all the other second years to decide on additional subjects that will dictate their future careers. There's more arguing over Gilderoy Lockhart since his classes on Defense Against the Dark Arts are a joke. And basically we get a bunch of Gryffindor characters and their decisions. Neville, for example, is stressed out and tries to pick subjects that are the least difficult based on his family members' advice. Dean Thomas picked completely at random, pretty much letting fate decide what he does next year. Hermione unsurprisingly picked every subject, and Harry asks Percy what he thinks, and he suggests divination and Muggle studies, the latter of which is piss easy for Harry, given he was pretty much a Muggle right until his first year at Hogwarts, although it might be cheating. Ultimately though, he bases his subjects off of what Ron's doing, hoping that if he's rubbish at it, at least he'll have Ron to help him. If you're wondering what I picked the subjects that allowed me to continue my career as a plagiarist. Then, of course, there's the next Quidditch match, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. Endless magical Rocky training montages later, and Harry feels more relaxed during practice than previously. Then comes the film's next plot point. After the discussion with Hagrid in the film, Neville comes in, telling Harry in a panicked voice what happened at the common room dormitory. In the book, Harry just walks in with Neville already inside the dormitory, but the effect is the same. The place is an absolute wreck, and the thing that's missing after a quick search is Tom Riddle's diary. It's a bit altered in both versions because in the book, he has to do a bit of a search, but since the movie only has so much time, they cut straight to Harry realizing the diary specifically is gone, and the only clue being that it was either a Gryffindor who already knows the password or someone else with higher power, like a teacher or God or whoever. So yeah, the diary's gone. That's one way to keep you on your toes with the story. After this is the prelude between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff in Quidditch. The book adds in a detail about how Harry didn't want to report the diary as stolen, because, you know, it wasn't a regular diary, and he'd have to explain how he got it. Harry then out of nowhere hears the lizard voice again, and Hermione indicates that she just realized something, and sprints towards the library. So with that being said, then comes the Quidditch game between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. In the book, they're about to play the first stage of the game, whereas in the movie, they don't even get to step out onto the field, because Professor McGonagall in both versions flat out cancels the match. McGonagall also tells the team, and by extension everyone, to head straight to their common room, where everything will be explained. McGonagall then also turns to Potter, telling him that there's something he has to see. Teeny tiny difference, but in the book, Ron tags along without McGonagall's objections, while in the movie, McGonagall also planned to show Ron what she's gonna show Harry. Movie-wise, we cut straight to the hospital wing, and you probably saw the writing on the wall.
Writings on the wall.
But they are taken to a bed in which they see Hermione, completely petrified. In the book, there's actually a second victim too, that being the Ravenclaw prefect Harry and Ron encountered while disguised as Crabbe and Goyle. In both versions, Hermione in a frozen stiff state was found holding a circular mirror, and the pair don't know anything about this when asked. So also adapted into the movie is Professor McGonagall addressing every single Gryffindor student, stating new rules in light of yet another goddamn attack. There will be strict curfews for all students. They will all be escorted to each class by a teacher, and so on and so forth. Precautions to keep students safe. I can also confirm that Professor Flitwick gave a similar speech in the Ravenclaw common room, stating out the new rules. So I can assume that the Hufflepuffs and Slytherins got the same treatment. So on the Gryffindor side of things, everyone afterwards bursts into conversation amongst each other, with Percy in particular horrified. And Fred and George mentioned to Harry that the petrified Ravenclaw prefect was Penelope the Clearwater. And if a prefect can be attacked, no one is safe. Harry also realizes that if the culprit isn't caught soon, it's back to the Dursleys for the rest of eternity. In both versions, Harry and Ron talk about how the time for delays is over. They need to speak to Hagrid now. If he set the monster out last time, he'll know how to get inside the Chamber of Secrets. On top of that, Harry decides it's time to pull out the invisibility cloak. After everyone falls asleep, they pull on the cloak and walk straight to Hagrid's old hut. The book describes the agonizing journey to the hut, as Ron at one point accidentally stubs his toe near Snape, but Snape sneezes at that exact moment. So in both versions, they knock on Hagrid's door, in which Hagrid, holding a crossbow, asks who's there. The pair proceed to take off the cloak, and Hagrid refuses to answer what the crossbow was for. And the book describes how everything was tense for Hagrid, such as when he was pouring tea for the pair of them before accidentally dropping and breaking it. In the movie, they try to ask Hagrid right away, but in both versions, before an answer is given, a knock comes at the door, and the pair have to pull over the invisibility cloak. Dumbledore comes in, followed by the titular Cornelius Fudge, played by the late Robert Hardy. Ron in the book whispers to Harry who it is, before Harry nudges him to shut up. Fudge is here to arrest Hagrid, and Hagrid pleads like he did 50 years ago. And despite Dumbledore's attempts to back Hagrid up, Fudge counters that Hagrid's record is against him. Hagrid says that he doesn't want to be taken to Azkaban, but then Lucius Malfoy comes in. He insults Hagrid by pretty much stating that his house is a pigsty, all before Lucius speaks to Dumbledore and tells him that he's been suspended as headmaster of Hogwarts, with all 12 signatures from the governors, including himself. So not only is Hagrid forced to leave, but so is Dumbledore. This is actually something Cornelius Fudge speaks up against, pointing out that if Dumbledore can't stop the attacks, then no one probably can. But Lucius counters that it's up to the governors to decide, and so Dumbledore for now is out. Before he and Hagrid are forced to leave, Dumbledore openly states that help will be granted at Hogwarts for whoever asks for it, pretty much staring at Harry, indicating that he can see through the invisibility cloak. And Hagrid also has his own direct statement to Harry and Ron, that being if they ever wanted to find out some stuff, they should go follow the spiders. And also someone needs to take care of Fang while he's away. And that's how the chapter ends. I'm actually impressed at how true to the source this chapter was. The dialogue, especially at the Hagrid's hut stuff, was incredibly accurate, and minimal stuff was omitted. With that being said, however, it's a good hook for the next chapter, with Hagrid giving a clue on where the next trail is. Hagrid was unable to tell them everything, but he pointed towards someone who does. Now, if you've only seen the movie, you might expect our pair to head straight into the Dark Forest in the book, but actually nope. In chapter 15, titled Aragog, it actually cuts to a bit later, where summer is rising over Hogwarts. With Hagrid and Dumbledore gone, things are taking a dark turn. Harry and Ron are also not allowed to visit Hermione, since according to Madame Pomfrey, it's too risky. On top of Harry contemplating Dumbledore's words, the pair also think about Hagrid's instructions concerning the spiders. Although unlike in the movie, they don't see any spiders left to follow in the castle. They're also forced to walk in a pack with other Gryffindors, and the only one enjoying himself is Draco Malfoy. During potions class, Malfoy gloats to Crabbe and Goyle about how he always knew his dad would be the one to kick Dumbledore out, being the worst headmaster the school ever had, and maybe now they'll get a quote decent new headmaster, since the stand-in headmaster, Professor McGonagall, won't last long in the position.
Wow, what an asshole.
Then, to make things worse, as soon as Snape marches in, Malfoy asks him to apply for the headmaster position, and Snape, happier than usual, does tell him that Dumbledore will likely be back, although Malfoy responds that he probably won't be, and he'll ask his father to vote for Snape given he applies, since he thinks he's the best teacher. Yeah, so we've got more to worry about. Snape, being the most biased, unfair teacher in the school becoming headmaster, it's unthinkable, but possible with Dumbledore gone. After Ron gets restrained with the fury to attack Malfoy, herbology class afterwards isn't much better, with both Justin and Hermione absent. Ernie Macmillan apologizes to Harry for suspecting him for being the attacker, because he knows that he would never ever attack his friend Hermione. You know, that brings up a question. Why in the hell was Harry suspected in the first place if Ernie knew about Hermione? Did he only find out about her Muggle-born status later? Because I remember in that scene with the Hufflepuffs gathered round, Ernie seemed to be under the impression that Harry wasn't friendly with any Muggle-borns, which wasn't true. He seemed to bring up the Dursleys as an example, but not Hermione. Speaking of Hermione, an overarching criticism I have for the rest of the book is that Hermione's absence doesn't really affect the progression of the plot in terms of getting things done. And what I mean by that is that since Hermione is an expert at everything, minus chess I guess, she always seemed to bail Harry and Ron out of many jams. But this time, I didn't really get the vibe that Harry and Ron were struggling to solve problems without her. In fact, as stated in the movie, the tighter pace and condensed story makes this doubly the case. There isn't really that moment where Harry and Ron realize that Hermione would have figured out what to do, and now they have to use their own heads to solve problems. I guess the absence of Hermione is good for a personal stake for the characters, but little more other than that. I'm just saying that there was a missed opportunity there. Anyways, aside from Ron not being as forgiving as Harry towards Ernie, and Ernie speculating instead that Draco Malfoy is behind it, Harry then nudges Ron and points towards the ground during class, and they both observe some large spiders scurrying across the ground, towards the direction of the Dark Forest. After all that, Snape escorts the class to defense against the dark arts with Lockhart. The pair plan out their venture into the Dark Forest behind everyone else being escorted. Now, you might actually remember from last time that Book Ron hadn't actually entered the Dark Forest before, while Movie Ron had in the last movie. So there's an added detail where Harry has to assure Ron that the Dark Forest isn't that bad. Aside from that, Lockhart walks in, the only teacher without a grim look in the slightest. Like a true jackass, Lockhart assures the class that the storm has passed, and Hagrid is the guilty one, because apparently the Ministry wouldn't have taken him away if they weren't 100% sure. And then adds once the petrified students return, they'll all point the finger at Hagrid. This both enrages Harry and Ron. Yeah, imagine Hermione trying to defend Lockhart this time if she were here. Despite that, the pair suck up the insufferable Lockhart and finish the class without drama. Back in the common room, everyone continually talks about the Chamber of Secrets, the attacks and everything in between. Harry refuses Fred and George's offer of playing a game, and well past midnight do the twins and Ginny and everyone else finally go to bed. Then the pair grab the invisibility cloak and sneak out of Hogwarts, dodging all the teachers on patrol until they make it to Hagrid's hut. Hagrid's dog Fang is pleased to see them, and to get him to quiet down from barking, they feed him some of Hagrid's treacle fudge. Hearing Fang eat fudge is strange to me, because I thought fudge is the sort of thing that kills dogs, just like chocolate. So maybe that's a slight oversight in the writing. Anyways, they decide to bring Fang with them into the Dark Forest, and we finally return to the movie, with the pair and Fang marching into the forest at night. In the movie, Ron even makes a complaint about why they have to follow the spiders, and not, quote, the butterflies. Anyways, this part of the story has Harry and Ron trail spiders deeper and deeper into the forest. The only notable difference I can think of is Harry using a lantern in the movie, while he just uses his wand with the Lumos spell in the book. The book describes how they just followed the spiders on the path for a solid 20 minutes, neither character saying anything to each other, right until when the trees became so thick that they couldn't see the night sky anymore, the spiders went off the path. Despite remembering that Hagrid warned him to not go off the path, he knows that he has to do just that. The movie actually excels at the horror atmosphere, as they seem to go through a tunnel and leads them straight to what they're looking for. Now, in the book, they actually find the flying car from earlier, which was previously last seen going into the Dark Forest when it ditched the pair of them upon arriving to school. And in the book, some large spiders grab both Harry and Ron and carry them towards a vast hollow, wide enough so the night sky is visible again. In both versions, however, whether they walked there or were dragged there, they encounter the one and only Aragog. The book describes him as the size of a small elephant, but in the movie, he seems to be even larger than that. So get ready for one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the entire movie, maybe even the entire series. In the book, the spider is completely old and blind, although I bet all of what most kids would notice is that it's a large spider. They did not hold back on the prosthetics for this thing. I sure the hell wouldn't want to be near this thing in the context of it being a mere movie prop, and the fact that both Harry and Ron are closer than reasonable to it must have really been a nightmare to film. Again, this is just an assumption, but there is a difference between seeing this thing on a digital screen and seeing this thing in the flesh. Just like Ron, I really didn't like the look of this thing. I had nightmares about large spiders occasionally myself. It's also worth noting that in Australia, many spiders are dangerous and should not be approached or touched. Fuck spiders is the point. This scene is only like an arachnophobe's nightmare come to life. In both versions, Aragog then asks if it's Hagrid who's there. When Harry identifies themselves as friends of Hagrid, Aragog responds that Hagrid has never sent anyone to him before. Harry responds that Hagrid's in trouble, that the Ministry thinks that Hagrid opened the Chamber of Secrets and unleashed the monster within. And here, it's revealed by Aragog's own admittance that he is not the monster from the Chamber of Secrets. He was brought from a faraway land and given by a traveller to Hagrid. The book elaborates, stating that he was taken in by Hagrid since he was an egg, in which Hagrid would keep him in a box, feeding him scraps every day from the Great Hall. Then when the attacks happened 50 years ago, everyone thought he was the monster and he fled into the Dark Forest. Despite that, Hagrid still came to visit him every so often, and he even got him a wife, Mozag, in which they had many children, all of which now surround Harry and Ron, asking if he does know what the monster really is. And Aragog responds that it's an ancient creature that all spiders fear. The book adds that when the attacks originally did happen, he begged Hagrid to let him out to get away. However, this is where the interview stops, as Aragog is too fearful to give the name of the creature from the Chamber of Secrets. And his book counterpart even adds that Hagrid asked him that same question over and over again. Harry tries to then excuse himself and Ron, although Aragog reveals that he can't simply let them go. While he never attacks Hagrid, he will not deny his children fresh meat, as he calls them, especially since they've just wandered into their home willy-nilly. In both versions, on the brink of being cornered, the flying car shows up to save the day, as it drives straight in, lights on, and knocking many spiders out of the way. It stops in front of Ron and Harry and opens its doors, inviting them in. The pair, including an oh-so-terrified Fang, get in, and they all speed off. Now, in the book, there's little drama on the way back, and it drives straight to the edge of the forest to let them out, before it gets straight back into the forest. In the movie, however, it's a creepy, crawly chase sequence, with spiders plucking on, and there's even a moment where a big spider grips Ron in a jump scare fashion, and Harry has to use his wand position carefully in order to get it off Ron, and they continue speeding off with the spiders in hot pursuit. Ron, after extensive trial and error, does manage to get the car to glide in the air, securing their escape before they get out of the car, and it drives itself back into the forest. In both versions, Ron is furious at Hagrid, remarking in the movie that if he ever gets out of Azkaban, he'll kill him. And in the book, starts ranting about Hagrid's problems with creatures and not seeing any problem with them, and then asks what they even got out of the near-death experience. And in both mutual versions, Harry responds that they now know that Hagrid never opened the Chamber of Secrets. He was innocent. The scene stops here in the movie, but in the book, right after Ron snorts, they make their way back inside the castle, and back into the Gryffindor common room, and they both go to bed. Harry thinking hard about what Aragog said. He makes a connection to Voldemort in the fact that other creatures are afraid to speak the name of the monster hidden in the chamber. Now in the book, this is where a specific detail pops into his mind. I didn't specifically mention this earlier, but Aragog referenced how the monster killed a girl in a bathroom. And who do you associate with being dead and a bathroom? Yeah, that's right. Moaning Myrtle, and Harry wakes Ron up, and they both now have an idea on what happened. Moaning Myrtle is quite possibly the girl killed 50 years ago, and that is some elaborate Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated shit, but it actually makes sense. It's also another Chekhov's gun, as Myrtle was presented as almost a one-off ghost character, meant to just be a sulker who was miserable 100% of the time. It's actually far more subtle than the mirror of Erised, actually. Myrtle's purpose was cleverly hidden by the fact that she served as a reason why nobody went into the girls' bathroom on the first floor, and Hermione could hide the polyjuice potion there. But it turns out that Moaning Myrtle has more relevance to the story than anyone could ever think. Now, the revelation about Myrtle comes a tad later in the film continuity, but I'd say this is around the time chapter 15 ends. Again, a lot to chew on. The highlight is especially the unnerving spiders and how hard the filmmakers tried to bring it to life. They thrived on any kid's arachnophobia to sell the scene. But even watching this scene today, I am still chilled a bit by it. The scene is pretty faithfully adapted. I also completely understand why the film omitted all of that school stuff from the start of the chapter, and it actually helped the film's pacing. Watching the film first, I actually expected them to go straight into the forest right away in the book, but they went back to Hogwarts for a bit, which was surprising. With that being said, however, I think we should move on to the next chapter, titled The Chamber of Secrets, and as one might piece together, we're going to finally see what this was all about. Since I mentioned the movie delayed the revelation about Myrtle, let's first discuss what happened in the book. In the book, Ron is annoyed, realizing that they could have asked Moaning Myrtle about all this time, in the middle of brewing the polyjuice potion. This conversation happens early the next morning in the Great Hall, and the thing is, they can't as easily go into the first floor girls' bathroom, given it's very close to the scene of the first attack, and with the school on lockdown more or less. But then Transfiguration class happens, and Professor McGonagall pisses every student off by announcing that they're still having exams, making Neville in particular drop his wand in shock, resulting in one of the table legs disappearing. This announcement actually makes them forget about the Chamber of Secrets for a minute, and despite McGonagall's justification, absolutely no one was prepared for this in the slightest. Then a few days after that, McGonagall has more pleasant news. The mandrakes are ready, and all the petrified students will be unpetrified tonight, much to everyone's applause, minus Draco Malfoy and some of the other Slytherins. Ron is very happy at this news, since they might not even need to ask Myrtle, and remarks that Hermione will probably be shocked that she's utterly unprepared for the exams. Then Ginny of all characters comes by and sits next to Ron, and Ron realizes that she's got something important to tell them. The pair ask her what's going on, but then Percy comes by, saying that he's starving, and Ginny walks away. Ron chastises Percy for interrupting them all, but Percy says that he knows what Ginny was gonna say, and, looking embarrassed, doesn't tell them what, only that it's not important, in the sort of way that indicates that it's not that important. So then the pair are being led to class by Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart, not caring about the lockdown in the slightest, unironically allows Harry and Ron to wander around without his eye on them, and see this as an opportunity to head straight for the first floor girls' bathroom. But then they're caught by Professor McGonagall. However, Harry lies that they wish to see Hermione in the hospital wing, to which McGonagall buys their story and gives them permission to go there. The pair then realize that they better make do on their luck and go to the hospital wing to see Hermione. And this is where the movie returns to what it shows us. You see, the movie cuts to this after they exit the dark forest, knowing Hagrid was innocent, and adapted from the book is the pair of them visiting Hermione, just that all the context behind that visit is cut and altered. Point is, Harry holds Hermione's left hand in the movie, but in both mutual versions, he notices that Hermione has something in that hand, a piece of paper. It's a page from a very old library book, and it seems to reveal what the creature in the Chamber of Secrets is. The page describes that one of the most fearsome monsters in the wizarding world is a basilisk, also known as the King of Serpents. It can grow to a massive size and live for hundreds of years. However, it notes that anyone who stares directly at it will be met with instant death. The page also notes that spiders flee from it, so Harry realizes what the voice he heard was. It was a basilisk, which of course is a serpent. The pair then realize that since nobody died, they must have not have seen it straight in the eye. Colin must have seen it through the camera he was holding. Justin must have seen it through nearly headless Nick's transparent body. And Nick obviously couldn't die again, with Hermione and the Ravenclaw prefect seeing it through the mirror Hermione was carrying. But then when it comes to Mrs. Norris, that makes Harry pause and think. But then he realized it must have been through some sort of reflection, like water. The first attack's crime scene was near Moaning Myrtle's bathroom after all. There's also an explanation for the dead rooster Hagrid was carrying in the book, since the crowing of a rooster is fatal to it, so the basilisk must have killed it before it could do that. Initially, that's my guess, but it's later revealed that it's not quite it. And then to ask how the snake's been getting around sneakily, Hermione wrote the word pipes onto the paper. Now this is where in the film continuity, Harry points out what Aragog said about the girl who died in the bathroom, and they realize it must have been Myrtle here. The dialogue is pretty accurate to the book with all the speculation and problem solving. However, a speaker goes off, telling all teachers to go to the staff room immediately, and all students to go to their common rooms. Well, actually in the movie, the first half is changed to the second floor corridor, which is where the original attack was. However, in both versions, aside from where the scene happens, the pair hide away from all the teachers who discuss the fact that the attacker has struck again, having taken a literal student into the Chamber of Secrets. And who this student is, it's none other than Ginny Weasley, making Ron completely dumbstruck, on top of leaving a new message underneath the old one that says, her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. McGonagall realizes that despite everything she said previously, all students will have to go home, and that this is the end of Hogwarts. Then Lockhart walks in on every other teacher, late for the meeting, on his usual air of cocky arrogance. He's then given the task to get rid of the monster, and save Ginny, and given his impressive record as stated in his own books, he should be able to take on the monster and save the day. Now that changes his expression. Instead of confidence, he's now got max level nervousness. And when all the other teachers remind him that he openly stated that he always knew where the Chamber of Secrets was, he'll be given free rein to deal with it. And that's where Lockhart excuses himself to go to his office to get ready. Now the book has an exclusive scene where Harry and Ron return to the Gryffindor common room, completely packed but quiet. And the two discuss how Ginny must know something about the Chamber of Secrets, and they might as well go tell Lockhart what they know, since he'll need the help trying to get into the chamber. The movie does convey this information too, but it's already on their way to tell Professor Lockhart. Point is, however, in both versions, upon reaching Lockhart's office, they see that Lockhart has pretty much been trying to leave, packing all his shit in trunks and whatnot. They ask what the hell he's doing, and Lockhart tells them that it's an urgent call and he's gotta go. Ron counters back what about his goddamn sister, but Lockhart feigns an apology and says that it's most unfortunate. I actually like how this is done in the movie, with the pair and Lockhart doing a hasty back and forth with the dialogue. When Harry says, "Are you going somewhere?" the way he says it is not only humorous, but also tells us his startled surprise. Getting on with the scene, however, Harry asks him why he's fleeing like a coward given all that stuff he did in his books. And Lockhart responds that those books wouldn't have sold half as well if people didn't believe he'd done all those things. Yeah, to no one's surprise, Lockhart admits that he just took credit for what other wizards and witches did, and then put a memory charm on them to make them forget about what they did, all the while he could take the credit. Wait, so Lockhart took the accomplishments of other people and passed them off as his own? Almost like plagiarism. Alright, you legend. You know what? I completely changed my mind about Lockhart. He's great. He gets it. Great minds think alike. I guess it's no coincidence he's in Ravenclaw. Previously I thought, why in the hell wasn't he a fucking Slytherin? But now, I get it. He understands the game. You don't have to be original, or in this case achieve anything. You can just take credit for other people's work and soar your career that way. It's why I ripped off Ryan Johnson's resume to ensure my place at Hogwarts. However, there is one mistake Lockhart made, and it's only what makes him a legend, and not a legend master plagiarist like me. And that's
getting caught.
Because before he can pull the memory charm spell on Ron and Harry, they pull out their own ones on him, and exclusive to the book, Harry blasts Lockhart to get him to lose grip of his wand, which Ron grabs and throws out the window. To be fair, it might have been a good idea to make this Ron's new wand for the rest of the series given his broken one, but I guess it doesn't matter that much come the next book. Anyways, in both versions, they march Lockhart straight into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, to which Harry questions Myrtle on how she died, and she explains that she remembers it well. She was crying in a cubicle right after another student, Olive Hornby, teased her about her glasses. She was in the middle of crying like she always does when she heard a voice speaking up a made-up language, which sounded like a boy, and when she unlocked the door to tell him to go away, she died on the spot. All she remembers was seeing a pair of big yellow eyes by the sink. The book also adds that she proceeded to haunt Olive after that, making her sorry that she ever teased her. But anyways, in both versions, Harry investigates the sink and proceeds to see the mark of a snake that was pretty much blink and you miss it, which is probably why nobody ever noticed it. Or even if they did, they probably think nothing of it. Anyways, Harry speaks in Parseltongue to open up, and the whole thing opens up, with a pipe large enough for anyone to get through. The way this is shown in the movie is quite dramatic on top of the score. Lockhart then tries to bail himself out, but the pair force him to go first, and they push him down the pipe. And in the movie, this is where Myrtle tells Harry that if he dies, there's always room for him to hang around in her cubicle. Ugh, no thanks. In both versions, Ron and Harry go down the pipe after Lockhart. In the book, it's described as extremely slimy, but based on what the movie shows, it's like a ride at Universal Studios or something. Now, in both versions, they fall into a tunnel system, the book describing it as wet, and there's a bunch of bones all around. Mostly that of small creatures like rats. Now the three of them venture into the chamber, with Harry warning the two of them that any sign of movement, they close their eyes and keep them shut. I guess one nitpick I have is why they don't force Lockhart to go ahead of them and turn every corner for them, and if he dies, at least they got a head start to fight or flight. But that aside, they come across the shedded skin of the snake, giving the three of them an idea on how big the basilisk must be. Then right as they discover the shedded skin, Lockhart surprises Ron. In the book, he dives at Ron and takes his wand, while in the movie he pretends to faint and snatches the wand off Ron when he's caught off guard. Then he blurts out that the adventure ends here. He's going to erase their memories, then take the snakeskin back to the staff, pretending that he killed the thing, while making up a story about how he was too late to save the girl. All the while, the pair of them tragically lost their minds seeing her mangled body, and right as he does the spell, since he used Ron's faulty wand, his plan backfires, and he ends up blasting himself with the memory charm. And at the same time, the tunnel is split in two as some debris falls from the ceiling and separates Harry from Ron and Lockhart. They call back to each other, and Harry is forced to go on without the pair. And in the movie, we see that Lockhart right away has completely lost his memory. He doesn't know who he is, or who Ron is, as he asks him his name. Lockhart is completely oblivious, and Ron just knocks him on the head with a stone to get him unconscious again. Either way, Harry ventures into the Chamber of Secrets alone. The book describes how it's a lot of turns, almost like a maze, while the movie just cuts to Harry finding a gate carved with snakes. He speaks in Parseltongue again to open up, and the door opens, letting Harry inside. And that's the end of chapter 16. As the part of the book straight towards the climax, the momentum is very strong. The set design on the part of the film is excellent, and quite how one with a vivid imagination would imagine the tunnels looking like. Based on how the book described it, the tunnel is also supposed to be wet, but that's an inconsequential omission. Most of the chapter is faithfully adapted, and it's very true to the source. Dialogue is directly translated, and it's done quite well. That's not to say the book doesn't give off a similar vibe, because it does. Since my rule is to watch the movie first, I very much imagine the film scenery while reading the book. So now we've got 2 more chapters before the book closes. As we move on to chapter 17, titled The Heir of Slytherin. And to be honest, this is the less spoilery of the chapter names, since we know that whoever is behind the attacks will be revealed here, and it must be an heir of Salazar Slytherin, given the prophecy established earlier. Anyways, in both versions, Harry finds himself at the end of a dimly lit vast chamber, all with a greenish colour vibe, with carvings of serpents on the side as Harry walks through the path. And eventually, after many careful footsteps, he sees a statue bigger than them all, almost as tall as the chamber itself. In front of the statue is, of course, Ginny Weasley, with Harry sprinting to her and trying to shake her awake without success. And then the strongest entity comes out of the shadows. Tom Riddle emerges from the darkness, stating that she won't wake, and that she's still alive, but just barely. A confused Harry asks Tom if he's supposed to be a ghost, and Tom responds that he's actually a memory, preserved in a diary for 50 years. He picks up Harry's wand and refuses to give it back to him. And as Harry pleads for him to help him and Ginny, talking about the basilisk that's around, Riddle starts to elaborate, and everything becomes clear. The book elaborates a lot, explaining how Ginny found the diary amongst her stuff and started writing in it, talking about all her troubles, such as her brothers teasing her, the fact that she got all her school stuff secondhand, and how she doubted how the legendary Harry Potter would ever like her. Tom mocking her as he does so. He explains how it's very boring hearing the troubles of an 11-year-old girl, but he still decided to be sympathetic and patient, and most of all, kind. Not that any of it was sincere, and Ginny eventually trusted the diary of Tom Riddle more and more, expressing to Tom how he was almost like a close friend she could keep in her pocket. Then, in both versions, he reveals that he got Ginny to open the Chamber of Secrets by putting her in a trance and erasing her memory and getting her to do stuff like killing the roosters from earlier. And Ginny kept writing to the diary frantically about how she seemed to lose her memory. And Riddle explains that it took an extremely long time for stupid little Ginny to stop trusting the diary, in which she then tried to dispose of it by throwing it in the first floor girls' bathroom. And of course, as fate would have it, who else would find it but Harry Potter? With Riddle expressing that he was extremely eager to speak to him. The reason why is because Ginny gave a lot of interesting information about Harry when writing to his diary. He explains that in order to gain his trust, he showed him the memory of him confronting Hagrid, describing him as an oaf while doing so. And he knew that his word against Hagrid's would be a no-brainer to all the teachers. In the book, he even says that he's surprised that next to everyone seemed to think he was guilty, given him being the heir of Slytherin was a flat-out stupid idea to consider. But as Tom Riddle was a prefect model student, however, he could get away with framing Hagrid. And the only one who believed Hagrid, although the damage had already been done, was the then Transfiguration teacher Albus Dumbledore. He kept Hagrid around even after he was expelled, training him to become gamekeeper at Hogwarts, all the while keeping a close eye on Tom. By his own admittance, he couldn't open the Chamber of Secrets again under a watchful eye, so he decided to preserve the memory of his 16-year-old self, and hopefully one day lead another to finish Salazar Slytherin's noble work, as he describes it. Harry counters how he hasn't finished it yet, since no one has died this time, and Tom responds that he doesn't care about killing Muggle-borns anymore, and that his new target has been him. Exclusive to the book is him further explaining how Ginny panicked when she learnt Harry got the diary, and fearful that Riddle would tell Harry everything she told Riddle, she stole it back. Knowing that Harry was on the trail of finding the heir of Slytherin, and after hearing that Harry could speak Parseltongue, and that he would be determined to solve the mystery after one of his friends was attacked, he put Ginny in a trance again, got her to write that second message, and to come down here to die. He explains that she put too much into the diary, and only further empowered himself, allowing him to leave the pages at last, and become a physical entity. Then in both versions, Tom Riddle asks Harry how he could have escaped Lord Voldemort, the greatest wizard of all time with nothing but a scar on his forehead. Harry retorts why the hell he'd care. Voldemort was after his time, to which Tom Riddle responds that actually, Lord Voldemort is his past, present, and future, to which he uses Harry's wand to write out his name into the air, Tom Marvolo Riddle, and then he rearranges the letters, spelling out a phrase, I am Lord Voldemort. Yeah, that's right, Tom Riddle is Voldemort.
No way!
Yeah, he explains that it was a secret name he fashioned for himself and told only his closest friends about. He tells Harry that he wasn't going to keep his muggle father's name forever, speaking about him with distaste. In the book, his distaste for his father is kind of understandable, since he adds that his father abandoned his mother after finding out she was a witch. But the thing is, he delusionally took his hatred out on all muggles. And this is where Tom Riddle gets no sympathy from anyone. I also had a look on the Harry Potter wiki, and turns out that his father wasn't so much in the wrong after all, since Tom's mother literally used a love potion to get him to marry her, and then when she stopped using the potion on him when she became pregnant, he, having free will again, left. This revelation doesn't happen until later in the series, But for now, one may think that Tom Riddle had a valid reason for hating his father, but not all muggles in general. I wanted to talk about this, however, because learning that Voldemort is indeed a half-blood, and in fact has a muggle father, makes Tom Riddle and all of his spite against muggle-borns hypocritical. Now, Voldemort has been analysed a lot, and here's a direct analogy of Silly Mustache Man, and he's like him in many ways. But since we're only on book 2 of 7, I wanted to talk about his prejudice only. Now, we all know that Silly Mustache Man hated Jews. It's something that everyone knows. Now, it's commonly agreed that it's unlikely that Silly Mustache Man had any Jewish ancestry, or that he would know anything about it on top of that. But from what I understand, Silly Mustache Man glorified features he himself did not have. Silly Mustache Man thought the perfect Aryan specimen was a white person with blonde hair and blue eyes, which is something he physically lacked. When it comes to Voldemort, however, I'd argue it's taken a step further, since he was prejudiced against what he in some parts was, a muggle-born. With Silly Mustache Man, you could say that he wasn't at least the group of people he hated, even if he wasn't physically a true Aryan. Voldemort, on the other hand, had muggle blood in him, and that is heavily indicated as making him insecure. As much as he tried to make himself a wizard over muggle, there is no escaping your heritage, and Voldemort chose not to accept it. You could say, on the other hand, Harry grew up with the shittiest muggles ever, but he didn't just generalize all muggles as bad after he learned that he was a wizard. He didn't resent his muggle-born mother for posthumously leaving him with the Dursleys due to blood. He openly prefers the wizarding world, but doesn't look down on muggle society. It's just the Dursleys who mistreat him. So bottom line, Voldemort is a complete hypocrite, and flat-out hypocrites can be a trait of some of the worst, most despicable villains in fiction. So back to the story. As Tom Riddle, or rather Voldemort, describes himself as the greatest sorcerer in the world, and Harry retorts that that title belongs to Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore's phoenix swoops by and drops a package to Harry. Riddle mocks Dumbledore by stating that all he sent was a bird and an old hat, as the package is indeed the Sorting Hat. Strange. In the book exclusively, Riddle asks Harry how he in the future was unable to kill him and how he lost his powers. To which Harry responds that it's completely unknown on the powers side of things, but he couldn't kill him because of his mother. And Riddle then starts comparing himself to Harry. They're both half-bloods, orphans, raised by muggles, the only two confirmed Parselmouths to come to Hogwarts, and they even look something alike. He then proceeds to challenge Harry, remarking what himself, Lord Voldemort, heir of Salazar Slytherin, can do against the famous Harry Potter in third person. All before he walks up to the statue of Salazar Slytherin, speaks Parseltongue, and in the book, we actually get to hear what Voldemort is saying. He is speaking to Salazar Slytherin posthumously, remarking him as the best of the 4 Hogwarts founders to assist him. And out comes the basilisk, and Harry, having no choice, bolts in the opposite direction, the book having him keep his eyes shut the whole time. However, the Phoenix Forks comes in to save the day, as it openly pokes the eyes of the basilisk, proceeding to blind it in both eyes. And since the basilisk requires eyesight to kill anyone who stares at its eyes, it cannot kill him that way anymore. In the book, Riddle starts to stress out for the first time in this whole confrontation, yelling at the serpent to ignore the bird and to kill Harry. In the movie, however, Voldemort has a brief shout of no, but then calms down and says that the basilisk can still hear him, where the book has him state that the serpent can smell him. The movie actually extends the battle by having Harry evade the basilisk through a tunnel, and when the blind serpent is about to touch him, he throws a rock to redirect the serpent. That's all before he returns to Ginny and Voldemort's spot, and a sword magically appears out of the Sorting Hat. Now, in the book, Fawkes actually threw the Sorting Hat towards Harry while the serpent was being blinded, and that's where he discovered the sword. The movie just added an extended battle sequence pretty much. You might remember Harry in the film climb the statue of Salazar Slytherin and managed to eventually impale the serpent through the mouth up top. Well, in the book, where Harry does all this is pretty much where he tripped over. Either way, in both versions, the basilisk manages to sink one of its fangs at Harry's elbow right before it dies. So it managed to get a hit on Harry after all. The poison is beginning to run deep, and Tom Riddle in the middle of this is mocking him, remarking how he'll be back with his mudblood mother soon. Now here, the the movie rearranges some events. In the movie, Harry grabs Tom Riddle's diary out from the collapsed Ginny's grasp, and using the fang that penetrated his elbow, he stabs into it numerous times, causing Voldemort to yell in pain and eventually dissolve. Ginny then proceeds to wake up, and she confesses to Harry that she opened the Chamber of Secrets, but Riddle made her do it. But Harry assures her everything's fine, and to go find Ron in the tunnels. Then, of course, Fawkes comes in, and Harry thanks him for his efforts. And then, as set up earlier, Fawkes cries into Harry's arm and he's healed, the venom not having any effect on him anymore due to the healing powers. Now, in the book, after defeating the Basilisk, Fawkes actually shows up earlier to heal Harry, just as he's about to black out. Voldemort actually forgets that phoenixes have healing powers, but he then says that it doesn't matter, as he, still with Harry's wand, is about to blast him out of existence. All before Fawkes comes back, throwing him Tom Riddle's diary, and Harry, without hesitation, impales the diary with the serpent's fang and obliterates Tom Riddle in one fell swoop. Then Ginny wakes up. So book Ginny is completely teary, and on top of what she says in the movie, is completely fearful that she'll be expelled. Something kinda clever that Harry says in the movie is that it's just a memory. So exclusive to the book is Harry and Ginny returning to Ron and Lockhart, with Ginny still crying in the book. And basically Fawkes motions for all of them to grab onto him. And this is something the movie shows, with the four of them flying up, making their way back to the school. In the book, upon making their way back up to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, Myrtle makes her remark about if Harry died, he was welcome to share her toilet, with Ron making a sound in disgust, and they all go out of the bathroom. Then they go straight to Professor McGonagall's office, and that's the end of chapter 17. So yeah, that was a pretty eventful climax, even from the abridged movie's perspective. The revelation that Tom Riddle was Voldemort the whole time, and the interesting fact that Voldemort was a half-blood despite hating Muggleborns, and everything else was interesting. The scenery is true to what the book described, and despite a few changes, they adapted the climax quite well. So now on to the final chapter, chapter 18. Titled Dobby's Reward, which tells you who is going to be in this chapter. Exclusive to the book is Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, along with Dumbledore in Professor McGonagall's office, with the Weasley parents hugging Ginny, and Fawkes flying straight to Dumbledore's shoulder. When McGonagall wants an explanation for everything, Harry does so, giving the full story, including hearing the snake voices, although he does omit everything about Ginny's trance in Tom Riddle's diary. Although when Dumbledore points out how Voldemort tranced Ginny, Harry then shows him the diary, and Dumbledore confirms that few know that Voldemort at one point was called Tom Riddle, and how after Riddle graduated Hogwarts, he disappeared and presumably studied the dark arts, and when he resurfaced as Lord Voldemort, he had zero resemblance to the once handsome head boy known as Tom Riddle. Anyways, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley do chastise Ginny for writing in the diary, because something enchanted like that probably had a dark purpose, although Dumbledore states that Ginny will receive no punishment, given Voldemort has tricked older and wiser wizards and witches than her. Dumbledore also tells Harry and Ron that the Mandrake juice is going to be used soon. Now this is where the film returns to what it shows us. After the Flying Fork scene, it cuts to Harry and Ron in Dumbledore's office, which is a different location to McGonagall's office the book showed them going to, but the dialogue is pretty similar in both versions. Dumbledore points out how they've broken over 100 school rules, but he can't expel them. Instead, he'll reward them both with special services to the school, and exclusive to the book, awards them 200 points each for Gryffindor, pretty much assuring their house a victory for the second year in a row. The oblivious Lockhart is also there in the book, and Ron is instructed to take Lockhart to the hospital wing while he talks to Harry in private. In the movie, he gets Ron out of his office by telling him to send a letter of release to Azkaban to let Hagrid out of there. Either way, Harry is alone with Dumbledore, to which the two of them speak about any other loose ends surrounding the whole story. He starts by thanking Harry and states that only his extreme loyalty allowed Fawkes to arrive and help. And afterwards, Harry speaks to Dumbledore about how Riddle pointed out similarities between himself and him. And Dumbledore starts by stating that the reason he can speak Parseltongue is because Voldemort transferred some of his powers and abilities to Harry when he tried to kill him. Unintentionally, of course. And that's why Harry can talk to snakes. It has nothing to do with being Slytherin's heir. So when Harry concludes that the Sorting Hat was right, and that he probably should be in Slytherin, Dumbledore points out that he was put in Gryffindor. He did have traits Salazar Slytherin admired, but the hat put him in Gryffindor. And it's not his abilities, but his choices that makes him different than Voldemort. And if he has any doubts he belongs in Gryffindor, then he should take a look at the sword that he used earlier. The one Fawkes delivered to him. He sees the name Godric Gryffindor carved on the sword, and he realizes that this was his sword. Dumbledore also remarks that only a true Gryffindor could have pulled that out of the hat. Then in both versions, Lucius Malfoy walks in with Dobby. And in the film continuity, this is where Harry realizes this is who Dobby serves. The Malfoys. Point is, Lucius tries to give Dumbledore shit for returning to the school, but then Dumbledore points out that the other governors, after hearing that Ginny was taken in the Chamber of Secrets, summoned him back, and also alluded towards the fact that Lucius threatened to curse their families if they didn't agree to suspend him in the first place. When Lucius questions if they found the culprit, Dumbledore then pulls out Tom Riddle's diary. All the while Dobby is signaling to Harry, Lucius, and the diary, and as one might piece together, it's all Lucius Malfoy's doing. He literally snuck the diary into Ginny's possession during the Diagon Alley sequence, and Book Harry bluntly points this out, but since there's no direct evidence that Lucius did it, he has to be let off. And Lucius tells Dobby that they're leaving, all before kicking him hard to get moving. Harry, seeing Dobby get abused, then has a clever plan. After getting Dumbledore's permission to give Lucius back Tom Riddle's diary, he proceeds to run after the pair and gives Lucius the diary, stating bluntly that it's his. And basically, what happened here is that he hid one of his socks in the diary. Or in the movie he does. In the book he hands Lucius the diary as well as the sock, and Lucius flings the sock away, only for, of course, Dobby to catch it. So yeah, in both versions, Dobby is given the impression that his master has presented him with clothes, and Lucius, upon realizing what just happened, is livid at Harry. Although how he deals with his anger is different in both versions. In the book, he tries lunging at Harry, only for Dobby to protect him. In the movie, however, and one may see this as poor writing, he whips out his wand and tries to do the killing curse on Harry. Or I would call it poor writing, if not for learning that the whole killing curse thing was actually improvised by Jason Isaacs during the filming of this scene. Although the subtitles call it something else, but point is, Jason Isaacs apparently forgot the spell his character was supposed to cast, and instead just blurted out Avada Kedavra, which is of course the killing curse. I don't know why they kept this in, but apparently, the writers aren't to blame for this. It was partially Jason Isaacs and whoever did the editing for the movie deciding to keep this in. So anyways, either way, Dobby protects Harry and sends Lucius flying back, forcing Lucius with his slave now free to just fuck off and accept his loss. He gets the message and angrily storms off. So then Dobby realizes that Harry freed him and asks what he can do for repayment. And Harry responds not to try and save his life again. The book also has Harry ask Dobby why he said that Voldemort never had anything to do with all this. Although Dobby says that that was actually supposed to be a clue, since apparently Tom Riddle was not quite Voldemort or something like that. Yeah, that was a pretty indirect clue. So then we get the scene at the Great Hall, with another Hogwarts feast, and Hermione comes in unpetrified, and the pair of them are happy to see her. There's actually that thing where she hugs Harry, but Measley shakes hands with Ron in the movie. The book also describes Justin Fletchley apologizing to Harry after he's been unpetrified. While this moment doesn't happen in the movie, Justin can be seen in the Great Hall at the end. The book also has Professor McGonagall announce that the school exams have been cancelled actually. But it's Dumbledore who says it, and in both versions, the only unhappy one is Hermione. So this is where the movie ends, with Hagrid coming back in, his honor restored. He thanks the trio for getting him out of prison, and everyone except Malfoy and his cronies cheer, and the camera pans out. Ha ha ha! You should have known I would pull that gag. In fact, to imitate the Transformers movies, I'm gonna play a different Linkin Park song at the end of each movie. So with that being said, the book describes the school year ending as Lucius Malfoy has been sacked as school governor, and his son no longer having such cocky arrogance around him. Defense against the dark arts classes were also cancelled, and how the book closes is by having Harry, Hermione, and the Weasleys, including Ron, George, Fred, and Ginny on the Hogwarts Express going back to King's Cross. And that's where Harry asks Ginny what he saw Percy do earlier. Yeah, it turns out Percy's got a secret girlfriend, who is none other than Penelope Clearwater, the Ravenclaw prefect. And Ginny caught them kissing in an empty classroom, and apparently that's who he was writing to last summer. Of course, Fred and George are gonna seize the opportunity to tease him every chance they get. Then when the train arrives at King's Cross, Harry writes Ron his phone number, explaining how he showed his dad how to work a telephone, and now they're all off parting ways. And that's the end of the Chamber of Secrets book, and I managed to make it through the whole thing without being petrified. So yeah, you'll see that I enjoyed this story as well. The book and movie both. Although I will say that the movie was a step down from the previous film, but only minorly. I'd say I'd give the movie a 9 out of 10 as opposed to a 9.5. I like how they brought a lot of the scenes to life and how they visualized a lot of what was in the book. We're starting to learn more and more about the wizarding world, and there is notable progress. The book does retain the score of a 9.5. So with that being said, that's my complete review of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I already exceeded the length of the last video. The book was an hour plus longer than the Philosopher's Stone. I also didn't convey it a lot during the review, but it did feel like more stuff was omitted than the Philosopher's Stone, despite the two books they're based on having similar lengths. Well, let me say firsthand that they really started to struggle with the adaptation come the third movie onwards. This is where the near endless praise actually ends, as I don't have many good things to say about the series going forward as I do for the first two films, and as fate would have it, people apparently think The Prisoner of Azkaban was the best film of the lot, but I'll save my criticisms for the Prisoner of Azkaban movie come the next video. So as you might have gathered, the books are still on equal footing, while the Chamber of Secrets movie is slightly inferior to the Philosopher's Stone. I guess I give the Philosopher's Stone film the victory because it had to establish a lot of things. While the Chamber of Secrets might have some new stuff in terms of set design, the Philosopher's Stone had to lay the groundwork, visualizing everything such as what the 4 Hogwarts houses looked like, as well as the castle, as well as character costumes, and all that sort of stuff. They had to determine the style of the movies if that made sense. And while they had book descriptions to go off of, there was still a lot of stuff they had to improvise on, like what the Gryffindor mascot actually looked like, and how it would be designed and all that. You also have to remember that since this is a continuous series, they had to secure the right actors for the roles. That's all I wanted to say, however. I've spent a ridiculous amount of time already reviewing and comparing, and I can say that as an adaptation, I fully approve of the Chamber of Secrets movie, although there are a few changes I don't like. I'll see you all come The Prisoner of Azkaban. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are spells but mystery potions?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the